All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to session 3 of the WSGA's rules review session. First, a big thank you to Dan Stolper for leading all of session 2 while I was someplace warmer. By all accounts, sounds like Dan did an excellent job, and I promise you my feelings would not be hurt if you would prefer to have him for the rest of the rules book. I would probably learn something that way myself. But today we'll cover rules 9 through 13. I'll do 9, 10, and 11, and Dan will cover rules 12 and 13. So with rule 9, before we dive into that itself, let's look at a few definitions, several of which are new for this year. First, let's look at known or virtually certain. And there's some interesting aspects to this a new defined term. We on page 208 say it's the standard for deciding what happened to a player's ball. For example, if it came to rest in a penalty area, if it moved, and if it did move, what caused it to move. And as we know, as rules officials, these can often be the most difficult decisions we have to make, because once we make that determination, it's usually straightforward to apply the rule itself. Known or virtually certain means more than just possible or probable. It means that either there's conclusive evidence that the event in question happened, such as when the player or witness saw it happen, so that would fall under the known part of the definition. Or the latter part, the virtually certain part, means that even though there is a very small degree of doubt, all reasonably available information shows that it's at least 95% likely that the event in question happened. And this is very interesting and helpful that, for years, common question among rules officials with the various terms used in such situations will be, well, what percent certainty do you have? And teachers would have the awkward situation of trying to dance around that and say, well, the rules don't really put a number on it, but, you have to be almost certain, but there could be some degree of doubt and all that, which, so some, if pressed, some teachers might say 95%, some might say 98%, some might say 90%, but now we have 95%, which is just a helpful way for us as officials to look at things and to approach things. Is it rhetorical?
I mean, how do we determine between 94 and 95? This is ridiculous.
Ken, I thought you'd like the empirical aspect of that as a former engineer.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm an engineer by education, and I'm sorry.
Well, I think it's very hard to differentiate between 94 and 95%, but it just helps paint a picture in our minds as to what we're looking for. And when you weigh all evidence, do you say, okay, my 50, is it 50-50, which clearly would not be known or virtually certain, or is it close to 100 but you just have the slightest doubt? So it helps. It helps. Certainly more helpful than what it was before. Then the definition goes on to clarify what all reasonably available information means, and that is that includes all information the player knows, and then all other information he or she can get with reasonable effort and without unreasonable delay. So if a player hits a ball towards a penalty area and trying to decide, if the ball is in the penalty area, what the player saw, the nature of the area, what other people saw. So it could be other players in the group, could be caddies in the group, could be, if there was a marshal right there, volunteer, right there that the player could have immediately asked, did you see this? Then the player's responsible for doing that. All right, next definition, moved, which on page 211. Similar but different to the previous definition. When a ball at rest has left its original spot and come to rest on any other spot, and this can be seen by the naked eye. So if the ball returns to its original spot, then it has not moved, and we've added the standard that this has to be visible by the naked eye. So in other words, if the ball's movement is discernible only through use of, say video evidence, then the ball would not be considered to have moved. A reminder that this applies in all directions, whether the ball's gone up, down, or horizontally in any direction. So if a ball is perched in tall grass and it drops half an inch, the ball has moved. Then we get into a very technical term here. If the ball at rest only wobbles, sometimes referred to as oscillating, but it stays on or returns to its original spot, then it has not moved. Next defined term, which is a new one, and it's actually right underneath it, is natural forces, which is a very powerful sounding term. By natural forces, we mean the effects of nature, such as wind, water, or kind of a catch-all, when something happens for no apparent reason because of the effects of gravity. So if a ball is at rest on a calm day and nothing is within 10 yards of it and the ball just rolls an inch, then we're going to say presumably that was caused by natural forces. And we'll see in a few minutes why that's important. Last definition, outside influence, on page 213. So a similar but different term than before, and also with different meanings. An outside influence is any of these people or things that can affect what happens to a player's ball or equipment on the course. And those are any person, except for the player or his or her caddy, or the partner, or the in match play opponent, or any of their caddies. So a player in the same group with the player in individual stroke play would be an outside influence. An animal would be an outside influence, such as the mouse at University Ridge that Dan and Gary had to deal with. And then any natural or artificial object or anything else, such as a ball in motion, except for natural forces. So pretty broad term there. So with all that in mind, let's go back to the rule on page 77. Start with the purpose of the rule. A reminder that this covers one of the two main principles of the game, and that is to play the ball as it lies. Then three specific points underneath that we'll see in more detail. If the ball comes to rest and is then moved by natural forces, normally, but not always, but normally the player will play the ball from its new spot. And that's, it's helpful to have that stated explicitly, because in many cases in the old rules, you arrived at that conclusion just through process of elimination. Say, well, if this, or this didn't cause the ball to move, then nothing tells us to replace the ball, so therefore we must play the ball as it lies. Whereas now the rule explicitly states in such a case, you normally play the ball from its new spot. Second bullet point, if a ball at rest is lifted or moved by anyone or any outside influence before the stroke is made, the ball must be replaced on its original spot. Sometimes we'll see later there can be a penalty, though. Players should take care when near any ball at rest, and a player who causes his or her own ball or in match play an opponent's ball to move will normally get a penalty. And we'll see there's a new exception for the putting green. The first sentence before we even get to Rule 9.1 is a useful reminder that the previous rules did not explicitly state. And that is that this rule applies to a ball in play at rest on the course and applies during the round as well as when play has been stopped. That before there was some confusion among some people as to what the status of a ball was when play had been stopped. But now this makes it clear that this rule still applies because that ball is still in play. All right, Rule 9.1 and 9.1a. playing ball from where it came to rest. Player's ball at rest on the course must be played as it lies. Again, a statement of one of the key principles behind the rules, except when the rules either require or allow the player to play a ball from somewhere else or to lift a ball and replace it, such as on the putting green. 9.1b covers what to do if the ball moves during the backswing or the stroke. One nice point, this is the first time we've seen the term backswing in the rules. Remember what it was before? Backward movement of the club for the stroke, which is a mouthful. So now we just say backswing, which is a well understood and much more succinct term. If a player's ball at rest begins moving after the player's begun the stroke, so after the player begins the downswing or the backswing, and the player goes on to make the stroke, the ball must not be replaced no matter what caused it to move. Instead, the player must play the ball from where it came to rest after the stroke. And if the player caused the ball to move, then we go to rule 9.4b to see if there's a penalty. So all this rule is saying that if the ball moves after you've begun your backswing and you go ahead and make the stroke, then you do not replace. The requirement to replace the ball does not apply. There could be a penalty in some cases, but the bottom line is you do not replace the ball. All right, on to rule 9.2, just with some general thoughts before we get into the specifics as to who or what caused the ball to move. As first, we have to decide whether the ball was moved and what caused it to move. Deciding whether the ball moved. And this is interesting. As I said, this can be a difficult situation for referees. 9.2a. A player's ball at rest is treated as having moved only if it's known or virtually certain that it did. If it might have moved, but this is not known or virtually certain, it's treated as not having moved and must be played as it lies. So what does that mean? Imagine this summer you're called over to a putting green and a player says, my ball may have moved. I'm not sure if it did. There are a number of questions you ask, such as, what did you do around the ball, and did you touch the ground? If so, did the ball move immediately before or after you did so? But at this point, you're simply trying to, even almost before you get to that, whether the player caused the ball to move, you need to determine whether the ball did in fact move. And if in talking to the player and talking with other players, gathering whatever information you can, and if it's not known or virtually certain, which means if it's not 95% certain the ball moved, then what do you say? You say the ball must not have moved. So therefore this rule would not apply. So that's helpful to have that in the rules stated explicitly, something that was not there before. Now, the second part, that if you determine that the ball did move, then need to determine what caused the ball to move. And we look at 9.2b. When a player's ball at rest has moved, it must be decided what caused it to move, because that will determine whether the player will replace the ball or play it as it lies, and whether there's a penalty. So there are two reasons that it's important to know what caused the ball to move, because the player needs to know where to play from. Does he play the ball from its new position, or does he replace it? And secondly, if there's a penalty, whether to him or to an opponent. And the next part indicates that the rules recognize only 4 possible causes for a ball at rest that's moved. So anytime a ball at rest is moved, as a referee, you're going to have to put that under one of these 4 situations. And that is, first, did natural forces such as wind or water cause the ball to move? Did the player, including the player's caddy, and then we see in blue below, it also includes, in a partnership format, the partner or partner's caddy. Or 3, in match play, the opponent or the opponent's caddy, or an outside influence, such as another player in stroke play. So anytime the ball's moved, you have to identify which of these four causes led to the ball's movement. And then, we refer to the definition of known or virtually certain standard. The player, the opponent, or an outside influence is treated as having caused the ball to move only if it is known or virtually certain to be the cause. If it's not known or virtually certain that at least one of these was the cause, the ball is treated as having been moved by natural forces. Now, this is a change for this year, and frankly, it's a player-friendly change. So again, imagine you go up to a player, let's say in the fairway, and he says, "Look, I was getting ready to play, and my ball moved." So we know for a fact the ball did move. So now, as a referee, you have to determine what caused the ball to move. And how do you approach that? You ask the player a number of questions as to what he did, what were his actions around the ball, what was the time lapse between when he may have, say, touched the ground near the ball and when the ball moved, and various things like that. And if after gathering that information, it's 95% certain or more that the player caused the ball to move, then we'll see that the player will have a penalty in many cases. But if it's not known or virtually certain, if let's say, for example, the player says, "Well, I just took a light practice swing, a club length away, and I just brushed the ground. I didn't take a divot or anything like that. And otherwise I didn't get within, a foot or so, or more of the ball, didn't do anything." And if in your eyes, say it might be 50-50 whether the player caused the ball to move, what does this mean? This means the player gets the benefit of the doubt. And if in your mind it's 50-50 that the player caused the ball to move, then the presumption is going to be what? That natural forces caused the ball to move. And then in the next section, we'll see the significance of that and how it can be different as to the procedure, as well as the penalty is different. Natural forces cause the ball to move, or if the player caused the ball to move. So 9.3. If natural forces such as wind or water cause the ball at rest to move, first point is there's no penalty. You can't penalize a player because a strong gust of wind moves his ball. And the ball must be played from its new spot. So going back to that situation we discussed, where let's say the player's ball's in the fairway, he calls you over and says, "Look, this ball just moved while I was getting ready to play it," and you determine that he did not cause the ball to move and no one else caused the ball to move. The presumption then is that natural forces caused the ball to move. So that means, good news for the player, is there's no penalty. So what's the second step once you've decided that there's no penalty? And that is where the player will play from. And this will tell us that the player will play the ball from its new location. So good or bad. If the ball rolls closer to the hole, good. If the ball rolls into a penalty area, not so good. And then there's an exception for this that's new for this year, and it's a very interesting and very specific one. And that is, ball and putting green must be replaced if it moves after having already been lifted and replaced. So if the ball on the putting green moves after the player had already lifted and replaced the ball in the spot from which it moved, the ball must be replaced on its original spot. And this is true no matter what caused the ball to move. So let's go through two examples of that. I hit my approach shot onto the green. As I'm walking up to the green, a strong gust of wind comes up, blows the ball off the green and into a bunker. All right, so in that case, what would be my procedure?
Get your sandwich out.
Get my sandwich out, as Phil says. Because in that case, natural forces cause my ball to move, so no penalty, and I play the ball from its new location. Now, where this exception applies is I hit my ball up onto the green, I go up to the green, mark my ball, lift it, and I replace the ball. And then while I'm surveying the putt, a strong gust of wind comes up, blows the ball into a bunker. Now, in that case, what do I do?
Get the rake out.
Get the rake out. That's right. I don't reach for the sand wedge. I reach for the rake to get the ball out of the bunker. Because why? Because I'm now required to replace the ball where it was on the putting green. So what's the difference? First case, I never touched my ball on the putting green. Second case, I lifted and replaced the ball. And that's what makes this exception apply.
A great way to remember that is once you've marked it, you own that spot.
Yeah. As Phil says, some people like to use the term own, that once you lift the ball from the putting green, that you quote unquote own that spot. And that if the ball, after you replace the ball, then moves, you are still going to replace the ball to that spot. So that should relieve some angst that players would have on windy days. And frankly, it gives players incentive to in those situations to mark their balls very quickly. With that. All right, Rule 9. And, with some of these, and, as is always the case, when you see a penalty statement, it's always a good idea to stop and ask, okay, what would be an example of the application of this penalty statement? And in this case, let's say players, an example would be a player's ball's at rest on the putting green. He marks, lifts, and replaces it. And then the wind moves the ball an inch. Then instead of replacing the ball, he plays the ball from its new place. Then what has he done? He has played from the wrong place, so he'll get the general penalty of loss of hole or 2 strokes. All right, now let's see. Rule 9.4, ball lifted or moved by the player. This rule applies only if it's known or virtually certain that the player lifted his or her ball or caused it to move. So first, we're going to talk about when that ball must be replaced. Now, if the player lifts his or her ball or causes it to move, the ball must be replaced on its original spot, except when the player lifts the ball under rule to take relief, as let's say, for example, he's taking relief from a cart path, or to replace a ball on a different spot, or when the ball moves only after the player's begun the stroke or the backswing and then goes on to make the stroke, as we saw at the start of this rule. So that's when the moved ball needs to be replaced. And now we're going to talk about next section, 9.4b, when there's a penalty for having lifted, deliberately touched, or caused the ball to move. And with this, I think it's helpful to keep in mind that there are 3 aspects to this rule, and that is lifting a ball. And hopefully, whenever a player lifts a ball, it'll be with authority, but sometimes a player might lift a ball without authority under the rules, and that would result in a penalty. Or when a player deliberately touches a ball, that can lead to a penalty. Or when the player might not directly have contact, but his actions cause the ball to move. Then in those cases, the player will get 1 penalty stroke. But there are 4 fairly extensive exceptions to that, to when they're meaning that in these situations there would be no penalty. Exception 1, which is just kind of an obvious one and a very necessary one. There's no penalty when the player lifts the ball or causes it to move under rule that allows the ball to be lifted and replaced. So that's relief. Because at first, when you read the first sentence, you're like, oh my gosh, anytime I lift my ball from the putting green, do I get a penalty? But exception 1 says, no, that's okay. Because on the putting green, you're specifically allowed to lift the ball and replace it, so no penalty for lifting it. Likewise, there's no penalty if a player lifts a ball that's moved and has to be replaced, or the player lifts a ball under a rule that requires or allows the player to drop a ball again or to play from a different place. So if the player's taking relief, he's allowed to lift the ball. All right, exception 2 on top of the next page. This is new for this year, and it's a very friendly one and a change, and it's really a reasonable and somewhat intuitive one. That is that there's no penalty when the player accidentally causes the ball to move while trying to find or identify it. So let's go through a couple of examples of that. So let's say Bill and I are playing together. We both hit our tee shots down the fairway. While we're walking to our balls, we're talking, I'm not paying attention to where I'm walking, and I accidentally kick and move my ball. Now, would this exception apply in that case?
No.
Answer would be no, because what? At that moment, was I trying to find my ball? No, because I knew my ball was in the fairway. I just wasn't paying attention, so I would be penalized. But now, let's say on the next hole, hit my ball into tall rough or in leaves, and while trying to find the ball, I accidentally move it. Now, in that case, would there be a penalty? Answer is no, because of this exception. So that is a nice, friendly exception. But again, it applies only when the player is trying to find the ball, or for that matter, once he's found it and he's trying to identify it. All right, now exception 3, something we've seen in the past via local rule is now part of the rules themselves. There's no penalty when the player accidentally causes the ball to move on the putting green, no matter how that happens. So whether the player's clumsy or careful, there's no penalty. So for example, if a player's ball lies on the putting green and he accidentally drops his putter on the ball, causes the ball to move, no penalty. But what does the player have to do? He does need to replace it. If the player is taking some practice swings to the side of the ball and accidentally strikes and moves the ball, would there be a penalty? No, this exception would apply as well. So key is that this applies only on the putting green. All right, then exception 4, which is longer, but again, a lot of these are just necessary exceptions and make sense. There's no penalty when the player accidentally causes the ball to move anywhere on the anywhere except on the putting green, because we know the putting green's already covered, while taking reasonable actions to, and in most cases this will be when the player's trying to apply a rule. For example, when the player marks the spot of the ball or lifts or replaces it, when the player removes a movable obstruction or restores worsened conditions, takes relief under rule, or measures under rule. So one thing that's nice with that, as long as the player's taking reasonable actions, there will not be a penalty. That the standard is not as great as it was before. That you may remember, for example, lifting and replacing the ball talked about that the player would avoid penalty only if the movement was directly attributable to the player's actions, which was a very high standard and which penalized the clumsy player. But in this case, the clumsy player now is okay. That if he's trying to lift his ball and he drops his ball marker on the ball, he's taking reasonable actions, and that would result in no penalty, and he just needs to replace the ball. So that is a nice change for this year. All right, Rule 9.5, talking about match play.
John?
Yeah.
Question before you go to 9.5. In 9.4b, it uses the term deliberately touching ball or causing it to move. But all the exceptions and everything after that don't talk about touching the ball. What is the situation there for touching the ball?
Yeah.
It doesn't move, but you touched it.
Yeah, Gary, I'm touching the ball. That's holdover. That was part of the old rule, and I think there's an interpretation that goes through some examples of that. So it's just it applies to situation where maybe a player just puts his finger on the ball and rotates it to identify it without having marked its spot, or when the player, or probably perhaps the most concerning example would be, say, if there's a loose impediment nearby and the player wants to make sure that his ball doesn't move while he removes the loose impediment, so he just sticks his finger on the ball, removes the leaf. That'd be an example of deliberately touching the ball. There would be a penalty.
But it's important to note that if you accidentally touch it, like with your putter or something like that, and it doesn't move, there's no penalty.
Okay.
Yeah, Phil makes a good point that the prohibition against touching applies only to deliberate touching, not to accidental touching. All right. Does that help, Gary?
Yep.
Okay. All right. 9.5, dealing with match play. 9.5a, when lifted or moved, ball must be replaced. So first, we're going to deal with where the player will play from, and then we'll look at whether there's a penalty. If the opponent lifts or moves the player's ball at rest, the ball must be replaced on its original spot, except when the opponent is conceding the next stroke, a hole, or a match. So if Bill and I are playing a match against each other and I hit a putt up 2 inches from the hole and Bill knocks it back to me saying that's good, naturally I don't have to replace that ball. Or when the opponent lifts or moves the ball at the player's request because the player intends to apply a rule or take relief or to replace the ball on a different spot. So, for example, we're looking for my ball and Bill finds it. It's in a penalty area and I'm some distance away and he says, John, here's your ball. And I say, oh, great. Would you mind lifting it? I'm going to take relief. And then Bill lifts it at my request. Then naturally I do not have to replace the ball because I'm going to play it from somewhere else. So now, but any other time the opponent lifts the ball, the player must replace it. Now let's look at when there would be a penalty. Now, if the player lifts or deliberately touches the ball at rest or causes it to move, so same three components of under 9.4b when the player himself does that, the opponent, the one who did that, gets one penalty stroke. But there are a number of exceptions. Exception 1, there's no penalty when the opponent lifts the ball when conceding the stroke, hole, or match, or at the player's request. So in those two examples I just gave, there's no penalty to Bill for what he did. Exception 2, and this is new for this year, and it's an interesting one. There's no penalty when the opponent marks the spot of the player's ball and lifts it on the putting green in the mistaken belief that it's the opponent's own ball. So let's take the example actually up here on the wall of, what's that, 13 at Oconomowoc with an elevated green, one of Dan's favorite holes that busy putted off the green down the hill.
Okay, John, come on now.
Way down the hill. We all knew that. Way down.
Yeah, but Jim was there. Sorry, Dan, I had to finish the story. Otherwise, people would thought that was a really obscure reference.
Yeah.
So,
You weren't the first and you won't be the last.
that let's say Dan and I are playing together. We had our approaches up to the green, very elevated green, and we can't really see where our balls come to rest. And we're playing a match against each other. And I, naturally assume that my ball's the one closer to the hole. So I go up to the green, mark spot of that ball, lift it, and I say, whoops, Dan, this is your ball. According to exception 2, well, what's the ruling?
No.
And then now, starting this year, and this is a change, there'd be no penalty. Yeah, that's right. Last year it would have been a penalty, but this year, no penalty. But it's a very specific set of facts, and that is the opponent has to mark the spot of the ball and lift it, and he has to do so in the belief that it's his own ball. That this does this apply if, let's say, Dan and I are playing together. Dan hits a greenside bunker shot up 5 feet from the hole. It's my turn to putt. Dan's ball's in my way. And without saying anything to Dan, I just go up, lift his ball, and set it aside so I can go ahead and putt. Does this exception apply in that case? And the answer is no, it does not apply. So in that case, I would still get, as the opponent, would get a penalty for that. So a specific exception. Exception 3, and this is actually fairly broad. It looks like one sentence, but it's actually more than that. That there's no penalty when the opponent accidentally causes the ball to move when taking any of the actions covered by exceptions 2, 3, or 4 in Rule 9.4b. So for example, if Ken and I are playing together and a match, and Ken is helping me find my ball, and Ken actually moves my ball while helping me, then there's no penalty to either player, and I replace the ball. So that's an example of, for example, applying exception 2 under Rule 9.4b in this case. All right, and then, at the end of the rule, when you see the penalty statement, it talks about the general penalty. You say, well, wait a minute, how could a player incur the general penalty under this rule? We just talked about how there can, in some cases, be a one-stroke penalty, but how do you get to the general penalty? Well, what's the requirement of 9.5A? The player has to replace the ball. So let's say that, the case where I lift Dan's ball without his authority from the green, and without thinking it was my ball. I knew all along it was his ball. That would be a penalty stroke. But then what if Dan, who's aware of this, plays the ball from the wrong place, does not properly replace the ball? Then he would lose the hole for playing from the wrong place. All right, now rule 9.6. What happens when outside influence lifts or moves the ball? Well, first point is that there's no penalty and the ball must be replaced. And next week, we'll talk about in Rule 14, where we see many references here, how the player will go about doing that. So just kind of file those references away for next week, where we'll spend a painful amount of time on Rule 14. And this applies whether or not the player's ball has been found. Sometimes you might see, for example, a dog run across the fairway, pick up the ball, and take it away, never to be found again. But if it's not known or virtually certain that the ball was lifted or moved by an outside influence and the ball is lost, then the player must take stroke and distance relief. So just as we had before. All right, Rule 9.7, a new section that was added specifically to talk about the ball marker. And because under the old rules, there was some confusion as to exactly how a ball marker was treated, and this makes it much more clear. First, as we saw the structure with the previous rules, talk about when the ball or ball marker must be replaced, and then whether there is a penalty. So if the player's ball marker is lifted or moved in any way, and that's a big term, because that includes by natural forces, before the ball is replaced, the player must either replace the ball on the spot or place the ball marker to mark that spot. So this would apply even if, and this is far-fetched, where a player marks the spot of his ball on the green, and then he steps back to survey the putt. And then there, in 30 seconds, there's a torrential rain that washes his ball marker off the green. That he doesn't have to go, that he'll simply either replace the ball where it was, and he's going to probably have to estimate that point, or place the ball marker or another ball marker on the spot where it would mark the spot of the ball. So in either case, replace it, and then we'll see if there's a penalty. Now, if the player or opponent in match play lifts the ball marker or causes it to move, the player or opponent gets one penalty stroke. But let's look at this exception. Those exceptions in the previous rules, 9.4b and 9.5b, apply. In all cases where the player or opponent gets no penalty for lifting the player's ball or accidentally causing it to move, there's no penalty for lifting or accidentally moving the player's ball marker. So, for example, if if I have a putt to for an outside chance to earn a tie on a hole, and Dan has a very short putt and I miss, and now Dan has 2 putts from 3 feet to win the hole. Naturally this allows me just to lift his ball marker and concede the stroke as well as the hole. So the result of that exception is that in general there will be very few penalties for lifting or moving a ball marker. There's still that potential, but there are fewer. You could have a case where perhaps the more likely case is in match play, where a player simply loses track of how many strokes everyone's taken, and no information has been exchanged. Where I lie 5, I'm putting for a 6, I miss it. Dan knocks the ball back to me, and then I lift his ball marker thinking that, his putt is for a 4, and he says, well, or rather, and then let's say Dan lifts his own ball marker because he thinks that he has lost the hole, that he thinks because he scored 6, but he thought I really scored 5. So he thought he was out of the hole when in fact he had a putt to tie the hole. So that'd be an example where there would be a penalty for lifting a ball marker. So that is Rule 9. Similar to the old Rule 18, but with some significant changes, both in terminology and format, and especially with some exceptions to that. So in general, there will be fewer penalties for move balls than there have been before. Any questions on that?
John, I got a question on 9-7. If I read this correctly, if a player is asked to move his ball, moves it over 1 club length, puts his ball marker down there. When he puts the ball back, he does not have to first put the ball marker back. He can simply pick the ball up, move it over the 1 club length, and put it on the same spot. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, that is correct.
And what happens if in marking my ball, I tap it down with the sole of the putter and the marker sticks to the putter?
Okay. And in that case, if the marker sticks to the putter, then we go back to say that, well, among other things, remember on the putting green, there's no penalty for accidental movement of the ball, which means there's no penalty for accidental movement of the ball marker in that case.
So basically, the ball marker and the ball are pretty much the same.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, what this does,
Except you can't knock the ball marker into the hole. You got to knock the ball in.
and what this does is for the first time, I don't know if you remember, but under the old rules, that conclusion that Ken hinted at, you could sort of get there when you piece the results of 3 or 4 decisions together, but you couldn't 100% get there. And this makes it much more explicit.
Like 95%.
One of the questions I have, and I don't think it's a huge difference, but that I have noted on here from our workshop, that equipment is an outside influence as being separated out from the player or the opponent's equipment, etc. And there's many cases where a player accidentally drops a club or what have you, and there would be no penalty if it was accidental, right?
Well,
even if it's his equipment.
Yeah, and I think one thing, Bill's right, equipment is treated a little bit differently under the new rules, but I think we still need to keep in mind that there's the aspect of whether the player causes the ball to move. And for example, if the player drops an object on the ball, whether it's his club or a rock or whatever, and accidentally does that, he has caused the ball to move. So then, we have to see, if this happened on the putting green, then there's no penalty and he'll replace it. But if it happened elsewhere, then there would be a penalty, as he did cause his ball to move.
Even if it were accidental.
Yeah, just because he is what put that object in motion. Correct. All right, Rule 10, which is a big one. And we'll start with 3 definitions. First, definition of advice on page 200. It's any verbal comment or action that is intended to influence a player. So this is much more narrow and specific than the previous version, which talked about, well, it's something that might influence. And it's not just that, it's just something that is intended to influence a player in choosing a club, making a stroke, or deciding how to play during a hole or round. So for example, the case where Bill and I are playing together on a par 3 hole, let's say I have the honor and I hit 6-iron and come up short. And then I say, geez, I can't believe 6-iron wasn't enough. You know, if I'm just saying that because I'm truly shocked that, you know, I can't hit my 6-iron more than 130 yards, then, and that was the sole reason I said that, made that statement. Have I given advice? No, because I did not intend for that statement to influence Bill's play. But if I said, you know, geez, you know, I should have hit 5-iron and wink at Bill, you know, with the clear intention of telling Bill to hit one more club and he thinks he should hit, then that would be advice. So that's a subtle but important change to the definition. Advice does not include public information such as location of things on the golf course, distance from one point to another, or the rules. So just as before with distance, that's considered just a matter of public information. So, you know, if, as I sometimes am, you know, the annoying person in the group without a rangefinder, but, you know, keep asking, Dan, would you mind telling me how far I am? You know, that's okay. That exchanging distance information is public information and is not advice.
Maybe you can ask your new spouse to get you a rangefinder as a honeymoon gift.
I need to think about that because I completely blank on it till, of course, I'm on the first fairway of the next round, and I hopefully during the off season I can do that. Next definition is caddy. Page 202. A caddy is someone who helps a player during a round in these ways: by carrying, transporting, or handling the clubs. So a person who carries, transports, you know, such as on a cart or trolley, or handles the player's clubs during play, is the player's caddy, even if the player doesn't say this is the caddy, except when done to move the club or bag out of the way as a courtesy, such as, you know, if I leave my bag and go back to play my ball, it's 20 yards out of the way, and then I realize my bag's on my line, and I say, hey, Dan, would you mind moving that out of the way? And then Dan would not be considered my caddy. And caddy also gives advice. Player's caddy is the only person other than a partner or partner's caddy. Player may ask for advice. A caddy is allowed to help the player in other ways. So one way to look at this is with the first bullet point is, say, especially in junior events, if a parent is carrying a player's rain suit or food, snacks, is that parent considered to be the player's caddy? And answer is no, because that parent is not carrying or handling the player's clubs or giving advice. Hopefully not giving advice.
Usually he's giving the rules official.
Yeah, right.
Very, very, very true. All right, last definition for this rule is stroke. Let's see, on page 219. It's the forward movement of the club made to strike the ball, so what we would normally call a downswing. But a stroke has not been made if the player decides during the downswing not to strike the ball and avoids doing so by deliberately stopping the club, or if unable to stop, by deliberately missing the ball. Sometimes you see Tiger, you know, who's distracted by a camera or something, stop the ball. And then there was the interesting case, you remember a few years ago, was it Kevin Na?
Kevin.
Yeah, who was teed up a ball and, you know, was making and he was in contention at the time and was going through some nerve issues. And it is making a swing, and you know, at first it looks like he just whiffed the ball. Here's a professional golfer who just missed a teed ball. But then after talking with him, I believe the tour officials decided that, well, he had intentionally altered the path because coming down, something happened and he no longer wanted to strike the ball. So if that's the case, then he's not considered to have made a stroke. Let's see, when the rules refer to playing a ball, that means the same as making a stroke. And that's one thing for those of you really into language, that in general the rules talk about making a stroke and playing a ball. So you don't play a stroke, you make a stroke, but you play a ball.
Question on that. If the ball is on a tee in the teeing ground and the player hears a sound and he tries to stop, but he accidentally, it's clear he tried to stop, but he accidentally clips the ball and skittles off the tee a little bit. Is that a stroke and he has to play from there? Because he did strike the ball, but he intended to stop.
All right, well, and Gary asked a good question that this first bullet point kind of begs. And that is, a player intends during the downswing not to strike the ball, but his reflexes aren't quite good enough, and he still makes some sort of contact with the ball. Well, let's take a look. That a stroke's not been made if the player decides during the downswing not to strike the ball and avoids doing so. So in this case, he didn't avoid striking the ball, so that would count as a stroke.
Even if it's on the tee and the ball hasn't been put into play yet?
Yeah, it would count. But it's not so much whether the ball's in play, it's just a question of, is the player considered to have made a stroke? All right, so now to Rule 10, which covers a lot of things. Purpose of the rule, and it's a kind of an important one. It establishes an important philosophical point. Rule 10 covers how to prepare for and make a stroke, includes and treats advice and other help the player may get from others. And the underlying principle is that golf is a game of skill and personal challenge. So again, that's the purpose of this rule, is just to make sure that skill and personal challenge remain part of the game. So 10.1 has its own purpose statement. This talks about how to make a stroke and several acts that are prohibited in making a stroke. The fundamental challenge is to direct and control the movement of the entire club by freely swinging the club without anchoring it. So there, the RNA and the USGA have flat out said that, that's a philosophical point of theirs, that, a proper stroke in golf is one that's not anchored. And that explains why Rule 10.1b exists. So first, 10.1a. In making a stroke, the player must fairly strike at the ball with the head of the club, so there's only momentary contact between the club and the ball, and the player must not push, scrape, or scoop the ball. Now with that, that's really the same as what we had before, but they've added some useful information. For example, in the old rules, it was kind of buried in a decision that one of the aspects of what fairly striking the ball means is that there was only momentary contact between the club head and the ball. And now that, pretty important guideline is now in the rule itself. So it's a great example of how the RNA and USGA have taken in useful information from a decision and now put it into the rule itself. Now, second bullet point, if the player's club accidentally hits the ball more than once, there's been only one stroke and there's no penalty. So this is a change. So if you double, or for that matter, triple hit, say a chip shot, that there's no penalty. You just count the original stroke and play the ball as it lies, which makes sense, because anytime a player double hits a ball, it's certainly unintentional, and often it's very debatable, and often the result hurts the player enough. Remember when TC Chen double hit that chip shot, the ball went off to the side, right? So that he certainly didn't benefit from playing the ball from where it wound up. So that goes hand in hand with the reduction of penalties for accidental deflections. Rule 10.1b, anchoring the club. This is something that's been around for several years now, so this should sound familiar. In making a stroke, the player must not anchor the club either directly by holding the club or a gripping hand against any part of the body, except the player may hold the club or gripping hand against the forearm, but not above the forearm. Or indirectly, player may not anchor the club through an anchor point by holding a forearm against any part of the body to use a gripping hand as a stable point around which the other hand may swing. Now, one interpretation that I think is very helpful with this is 10.1b/1, and that is it really goes on to clarify what's meant by an anchor point in that second bullet, and that is with the second paragraph of the interpretation. This is on page 147. It says, for an anchor point to exist, two things must happen. One, the player must hold a forearm against the body, and two, the player must grip the club so the hands are separated and work independently from each other. So both of those things have to happen. So the forearm must be against the body and the hands are separated. So if that happens, then there is an anchor point, and that type of method is prohibited by this rule. The rule goes on to say if the club, gripping hand, or forearm merely touches the body or clothing during the stroke without being held there, there's no breach of the rules. Then we have an anatomical clarification that the forearm means the part of the arm below the elbow joint and includes the wrist. So we've had this for several years. Have we had any issues at WSGA events with this or any questions? Okay. All right, very good. And then we see a nice diagram on the next page showing what is and is not allowed. Rule 10.1c, and this has been expanded. Player must not make a stroke from a stance with a foot deliberately placed on each side of, or with either foot deliberately touching the line of play or an extension of that line behind the ball. For this rule only, the line of play does not include a reasonable distance on either side. So this prohibition now applies anywhere on the course, not just on the for a stroke on the putting green. So this is something to be mindful of, as there is the potential for a player, well, when he gets into the trees or if he gets near a boundary corner, where he might have difficulty with playing the ball without using such a stance. But that's just something he needs to keep in mind. And as referees, we can caution the player, that if it's clear he's thinking about playing it in such a way, because that's, we can say, just remember, if you actually play the ball in that manner, it'll be a breach of the rules. The exception remains that there's no penalty if the stance is taken accidentally, meaning you're not really aware of what you're doing, or to avoid another player's line of play. So on the putting green with the ladder point, for example, you might intentionally put a foot down behind, 18 inches behind your ball, just so you don't stand on another player's line of play. All right, rule 10.1b. Player must not make a stroke at a moving ball. We say a ball in play is moving when it's not at rest on a spot. And if a ball has come to rest, is wobbling, as we saw with the definition, it's treated as being at rest and is not a moving ball. So therefore, if you have a ball, say on a putting green that's wobbling, and if you go ahead and play it, you're not playing a moving ball. So there'd be no penalty for playing a wobbling ball. But there are three exceptions when there's no penalty for playing a moving ball. First, as we saw at the start of Rule 9, if the ball begins to move after your backswing and the stroke is made. Secondly, as Dan covered last session, if the ball falls off the tee and you make a stroke at the ball in those circumstances. And then the third exception is if the ball's moving in water. And this has been broadened for this year. So if the ball's moving either in temporary water or in water in a penalty area, the player may make a stroke or may take relief. But in either case, the player must not unreasonably delay play to allow the wind or water current to move the ball to a better spot. And then after the penalty statement, there's a useful sentence that's been added for this year, that explicitly states what has been the case. And that is, In stroke play, a stroke made in breach of this rule counts, and the player gets 2 penalty strokes. Let's say, for example, a player makes a stroke using an anchored method, that he will count the stroke he makes using the anchored method, and then he will add 2 penalty strokes. So making that 3 strokes in all. Before, it wasn't always clear if the stroke counts, or does he just add 2 penalty strokes, or does he add 2, or does he add 3? And this just makes it very clear that even though it was an improper method for making a stroke, he did make a stroke, and therefore that stroke counts in a score. Rule 10.2, advice, and this has several aspects of it: advice and other help. And again, we have a purpose statement. A fundamental challenge for the player is deciding the strategy and tactics for his or her play, so there are limits to the advice and other help the player may get during the round. All right, keep in mind the definition of advice that we just saw. During a round, so this rule applies only during the round. Player must not give advice to anyone in the competition playing on the course, ask anyone for advice other than his caddy. So anyone could be another player, or it could be a spectator. So you can't go up to a spectator sitting in a green and say, how have players been playing this putt? Player must not touch another player's equipment to learn information that would be advice if given by or asked of the other player, such as touching the other player's clubs to see what players using. So that last bullet point's interesting. Again, it takes what had been a decision and puts it in the rule itself. And then also, as we'll see, as we have seen, we'll continue to see, that it's helpful that the rules will offer examples, that if it weren't for that parenthetical example, on surface reading, that sounds a little odd, doesn't it? But then when you say, oh, okay, got it. So I'm not allowed to remove the towel covering my opponent's clubs to see what he just hit. And then after that, it goes on to say that this rule does not apply before a round, while play has been stopped, or between rounds. So if play has been stopped and Dan and I are in the clubhouse waiting out a thunderstorm, and Dan's on hole 16, I'm on hole 8, I can say, hey, Dan, what club do you hit on hole 12? Or something like that, that is okay to do. All right, then rule 10.2b, which has five sections to it. So a lot going on here. First, point out a line of play for a ball anywhere except on the putting green. That it's okay to have the caddy or any other person stand on or close to the line of play to show where it is, but that player has to move away before the stroke is made. It's okay to have an object set down to show the line, but that object must be removed before the stroke is made. So just as we had before. Now on the putting green, it's a little bit different this year. The stroke, before the stroke's made, only the player or his caddy may point out the line of play. Because let's face it, on the putting green, if you're pointing out a line of play, you're really what? Giving advice, aren't you? But with these limitations, this first part's a change. The player or caddy may touch the putting green with a hand, foot, or anything he or she's holding, but must not improve the conditions affecting the stroke. So it's okay to touch the green as long as you don't actually improve, for example, the line of play. However, the player or caddy must not set an object down anywhere on or off the putting green to show the line of play, even if that object's removed before the stroke. So it's okay to touch it to touch the putting green as long as you don't improve anything, as long as you don't remain in that position during the stroke, but you may not say set down a water bottle saying aim here. Now, while the stroke's being made, the caddy must not deliberately stand in a location on or close to the line of play or do anything else, such as point out spot on the putting green to point out the line. Third part, no setting down object to help in taking stance. And this is a change for this year. And it goes hand in hand with the next one where really the rules makers are saying that players need to align themselves on their own without the assistance of anything or anybody. A player must not take a stance for the stroke using any object that was set down by or for the player to help in lining up his feet or body, such as a club on the ground to show the line of play. If the player takes a stance in breach of this rule, he or she cannot avoid penalty by backing away from the stance and removing the object. So this is something I'm not sure if we see this happen in competition as much as just casual rounds, but just something to keep in mind that that is not allowable, whether it's with a club or an alignment rod. Can't put it down there. Now the next one, which is really one of the bigger changes for the year, and we saw why this past weekend. When the player begins taking a stance for the stroke and until the stroke is made. So one key point here is it doesn't apply simply after the player's taken a stance. This rule applies once the player begins to take a stance. So that's pretty early. The player's caddy must not deliberately stand in a location on or close to an extension line of play behind the ball for any reason. So even if, let's say, it's the players in the last group of the day, and the last hole plays into the setting sun, and the caddy says, "Here, I'll stand behind you to help follow the ball." You can't do that. That caddy may not stand back there for any reason, even if it's not for alignment purposes.
So basically, if the caddy is helping the player line up the putt, the player must be careful, make certain that it's 95% certain that he's standing over the ball ready to putt.
Yeah, and we'll see. There is an exception for the putting green that can help the player, but we'll finish. We'll go through the rest of this rule, and then we'll talk about some examples because there's a lot going on. If the player takes a stance in breach of this rule, he or she cannot avoid penalty by backing away. So if I'm Bill's caddy, Bill starts to take his stance, he gets over the ball and he sees me behind him. Let's say he's getting ready to play an approach shot. What? He's not going to be very happy because he's already incurred the penalty. And I'm his caddy, that he's already incurred the penalty. But look at this exception that applies when the ball is on the putting green. When the ball's on the putting green, there's no penalty if the player backs away from the stance and does not begin to take the stance again until after the caddy is moved out of the way. So on the putting green, there's some leeway. The player can, for lack of a better term, kind of correct that mistake. But anywhere else, the player may not. So, I think several key points. This applies anywhere on the course, and it applies once the player begins to take his stance. Even if not simply after he's taken a stance or during this swing. It occurs when he begins to take the stance, and that the caddy may not stand back there for any reason, even if it's not for alignment purposes. On the putting green, the player has a chance to avoid penalty by backing away and starting over, but anywhere other than on the putting green, the player cannot avoid penalty by backing away and starting over. Now, we saw in Dubai on Sunday a case with this involving Mr. Lee, where he had I haven't seen a video, I have seen a still of it, where it's clear when you look at his feet that he had started to take a stance while his caddy was on the extension of the line of play behind him, and he obviously must not have backed away, and he was penalized. And I'm not sure there's any question that was the right ruling. It's it's a tough situation, and this is one thing that at our level we need to be extremely mindful of, because you could argue that on the professional tours, in theory, this shouldn't be that much of an issue because these are professional caddies, most of the time, And, there are only a certain number of people who caddy on the PGA Tour in a certain year. And, the PGA Tour has done a really good job with education, both for caddies and for the players. And what concerns me, and I don't know if you're also concerned, Bill, but at our events, when we have people caddying that are not golfers, that have never caddied before, this is kind of concerning because that's somewhat of a intuitive place to stand, to help a player. And, we need to think and talk about, what we can do from an education perspective to try to head that off.
While the rule was different, a famous kind of thing of that, Mason Crosby, the kicker for the Packers, played in state amateur qualifying somewhere like Bullseye, I think it was.
No, I think it was at Fond du Lac.
Well, no, this was before even that. It was the first time he had ever played, and he had a buddy of his caddying for him. And on the first hole, he hit a drive right down the middle of the fairway. And before it was while the stroke was made. And here's some guy that doesn't know anything about golf that's caddying for him. And Mason Crosby hits a shot with the caddy standing on the extension of the line of play. And I won't mention who, but one of our officials walked up and said, Mason, remember to add 2 strokes. You're now on the green in 4 strokes. And we didn't see Mason for about 5 years. And I had just thought maybe at our level, a better way to handle that, while it is technically a penalty, would be to say, it appeared to me you were close to the extension of the line and you're not allowed to do that for future reference. At what point does it get serious enough where if the guy, like Houghton Lee, at what point do you step in and say it's a penalty on our level?
Yeah.
And someone called me that morning about the Dubai and said, do you think they were sending a message? And you knew it was going to happen. I would have bet thousands of dollars it would have happened on the LPGA tour before it would have happened on the European or PGA tour.
Yeah, well, I'd say the European tour wasn't really sending a message; they were just applying the rule. And just like with us, just want to say for the record, since this is being recorded, if this situation does occur at a WSGA event, that it is a breach of the rules, and if we're aware of it, that there will be a penalty. But Bill makes a good point that with the Dubai incident, if it had not been for the assistance of television, could the committee have been confident enough in the facts to have said it was a breach? And obviously, our television contract still hasn't been finalized, so we're probably not going to have the help or, frankly, hindrance of televised video from television coverage for WSGA events this year. So, it's a question of when, if, as is often the case, if you're an official sitting in a cart off to the side, you really can't be sure of the angles. So I think what Bill says is right, that if you're not sure of the geometry of what happened, a good way to approach it, if you're not sure of the facts, is to go up to and I'd say the player and the caddy and say, hey, just so you know, it looked like you could have been close to an extension line of play behind the ball once you started to take your stroke. I wasn't sure, but just make sure that be mindful of that. And this is a new rule for this year, and make sure the caddy's well to the side before you start to take your stance to make sure that there's no breach.
I think that this could be solved on the first tee by the starters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if only we could find some good starters.
Careful, they're listening too.
But I think Ken, our ace starter, makes a really good point that because especially you have a feel for say you might have a 13-year-old who's perhaps never been on a golf course before, and finding a nice way to say, and I think it's helpful to mention it both to the player and to the caddy so they can both be aware of that. And you don't want to say we necessarily want to put the fear of God in people, but that just to make things black and white, because this has the potential to be an issue. And
I think the word perception should be included in
Okay.
the discussion.
I think that's a good idea.
You know, I,
I think we ought to try to nudge the WIAA to declare or have a local rule that says the coach.
Hmm.
And this rule applies to the coach because they'll get behind and they'll line up the kids on every shot under the theory, we've always treated them as not being caddies. And so you really haven't helped solve that problem for the high school kids because the coach will be lining them up on shots in the fairway and on the green.
Well, actually, we have under, you gonna come
Oh, no, sorry, go
in?
ahead. Dan.
Under
Coach
Rule
is not allowed on the
24,
green.
which we'll cover in a couple of weeks, this issue is specifically addressed.
Right.
And the USGA has issued a clarification that says under Rule 24, if you're an advice giver, which a coach would be considered, you then cannot do what a caddy would be prohibited from doing. So there should not be a rules issue with the WIAA. It should be a, how do we put this?
Education.
Explanation, well said. Before we start, as a reminder, da, 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 da.
Otherwise, the first time it'll come up will be at a state tournament because they won't do it during their.
Yeah, and Dan makes a good
Well, you don't
point
have to
that
worry on the green. The coach isn't allowed on the green.
Well, no, but they'll be behind them. They'll be off the green,
yeah.
but they're behind lining it up in the general area. They'll still be help them set up their feet.
Yeah, and Dan makes a good point by referencing that clarification from the USGA saying that the advice giver may not stand behind there. That is something that I don't think can be overemphasized to the coaches as well as players. I think that's because I think intuitively a lot of people think, oh, well, just your caddy can't stand back there. But that also applies if it's a partnership format to your partner and if it's a team format to the advice giver.
how I actually picture this coming up more than one of our officials being off to the side is a group of players starts getting accusatory of one another, whether it be in a match play situation or a stroke play. And one player says to another, hey, your caddy was on the extension, and you're not there. There is no TV. Does it come down to what it always was, where it's, the majority wins, so to say, where if it's just you against your word against my word, we go with the player. Which
Yeah.
you'll never see the caddy near the line
Yeah,
ever again.
but I think you're right, Bill. That's at our level is likely how it'll come up. That one player will say, oh, Dan had his caddy standing behind him, and then we have the ugly job of trying to sort out the facts. And as you said, if the facts don't provide a clear answer, or if the information we gather don't provide a clear picture of the facts, we generally give the benefit of the doubt to the player involved. But the one benefit of that is, let's say that happens once, it's a good chance after having been through that, it won't happen again. So that's the good thing.
Question.
Yeah.
What was the purpose of the rule change?
The purpose of the rule change, I think, was really just to say that alignment is a skill and is part of the challenge of making a stroke that the player needs to do on his own.
Okay, so the line of putt does not extend beyond the hole.
Mhm.
So therefore, the caddy could stand on the other side of the hole and line up the putt for him.
Well, that's right. That the caddy could stand on the other side of the hole, whether it's for a putt or shot from off the green, to help with alignment, as long as the caddy's not standing there to provide an aiming point or something like that. So that is okay. That this applies only on extension of the line of play behind the ball. Doesn't say anything about extension of line of play beyond the hole.
Someone asked me that, and I said to them, on the green, you could see that happening more, because if I have a 150-yard shot and I want my caddy to line me up, at some point, we're talking about unreasonable delay or what,
You know.
you know.
No, but I mean, Ken's right. And, some things, like, Ken's point or question, I think are very good ones because they force us to read the rules very closely and to see exactly what the rule says. And yeah, there's no prohibition on that. So if somehow that could work out, that's okay. So something, I'm sure we'll be talking about this much more as, we talk about, education efforts, whether it's, an article in the Wisconsin Golfer, I think as Ken rightly said, the, having the starters talk to players and caddies, and maybe if there's even something else we want to, make available to players who in our events. Is this, especially with inexperienced people, that this is has the potential to be quite a situation.
John, can I ask a question about
Yeah.
number 2?
Yeah, Jim.
Under there? They had this interpretation or decision where a caddy is standing, next to the pin attending the flag, and the caddy says, John, aim at my right foot. Okay, and then the decision was if he didn't move his foot, it was a penalty, and if he did move his foot a little bit, it wasn't. But I assume that was more because you couldn't touch the line of putt previous years, but now you can touch the line of play. Does that interpretation or decision still apply?
No.
Or
Well,
does that caddy have to move his foot a little bit?
Well, Jim, it's a very good question, and in all candor, that's why I skipped over that exception when
Well, I
when
got it
going
wrong
through the
twice
rules.
on the national test, and I thought I understand it both
because
times.
looking at that last night, I said, Dan, I'm trying to remember. I think did this come up at the workshop at Golf House? And there was a fair amount of discussion. I'm trying to remember if there was a clear conclusion that that exception under clause 2 about the caddy attending the flagstick. Does that mean that the caddy, while attending the flagstick, can also say, "Here, aim at my right foot," or what? Do you?
I don't remember.
Okay. I want to say that came up and everyone agreed it was a good question. And I'm not sure what the if there was an agreed answer. I'm embarrassed to say.
We could check.
Yeah, but yeah. We'll try. Let's remember to get an answer on that, because if it turns out that is permissible, and that's something players and caddies are going to want to know and do. I mean, that's something that is really, and is part of the concern is if that is permissible, that's really a pretty blatant way to circumvent the rule. To tell the caddy, okay, you can't put a water bottle down 3 inches to the side of the hole, but for this 5-foot putt, you can attend the flagstick and put your toe right there. Which,
let's say that the caddy and the player have an inner monologue between themselves that they don't talk about it, but they, before they start the round or whatever, caddy says, "Well, I'm going to put my foot," but there's never any verbal.
communication. And Dan's right that a lot of times, and for example, even just when we're playing without caddies, what I'll often do, depending on where the shadow is and where other people's balls are, if I'm attending the flagstick for Dan, I more often than not will stand on the high side of the hole, figuring, I'm sure some part of my feet, could be helpful to Dan. I don't know what it is, but just putting something there that could be used. And, without that discussion, that's certainly okay. But, to Jim's specific point of if you're actually in this exception under the second clause, does that mean that the caddy can really do almost anything while attending the flagstick? And it's a very good question. I don't know the answer.
John,
Yeah.
putting your old USGA hat back on, some of the rules are intent-based with regard to whether there's a penalty or not. You gave the example of the 6-iron for giving advice, where you weren't intending to help anybody, so it's no penalty. But the situation where the person stands behind the player it might be inadvertently, carelessly, or like Bill mentioned, we see it so often in state am and things where caddies don't know they're not supposed to do that. And it's advertent, it isn't to help the caddy or the player, he hasn't said anything. There, it's black and white, and it is a penalty. And there's no intent to do anything wrong.
I think
Has there been any thought ever given to like, and we do this, like Bill said, give a warning to the player, like a sideline warning in football, is no penalty up, but the next time you do it, there's gonna be a penalty.
Well, I think, Gary, you make a good point with 10.2B4 and caddy stand behind the player. And there are two aspects to it that are not at odds with each other, but they have an interesting relationship. And that is that first, it says the player's caddy must not deliberately stand there. So for example, if I'm Dan's caddy and he's putting over there and I'm 20 yards behind him and I'm just talking to Bill, and it's by pure chance that I happen to be on extension of the line of play behind Dan, but I have no idea because I'm not at that point even conscious of where Dan is. I'm just talking with Bill. We're trying to decide how, if we think we're getting nice tips at the end of the round or what. That in that case, there's no breach because I wasn't deliberately standing on extension line of play behind the ball. But what would be a breach if I am deliberately standing there? For example, I'm watching Dan, and maybe I just want to watch it. I just want to watch his nice swing. I want to help follow the ball into the sun, or what have you. Then that would be a breach. So there is a little bit. So intention can play a little bit of a factor in terms of if the player really was simply, I'd almost say, not aware of where he was.
Because it says deliberate, and then the next sentence it says for any reason.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's where the clash
Yeah.
is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could have a case where, again, when I'm talking to Bill, I'm not deliberately standing on extension of line of play. But if I am deliberately standing on that extension for any reason, to follow the ball, to make sure my shadow doesn't interfere with Dan's play, for any reason, that would be a breach. So you have to look at both of those points. All right, next section, 10.2B5, similar to what we've seen before. Player must not make a stroke while getting physical help from his caddy or anyone else, or with his or her caddy or any other person or object deliberately positioned to give protection from sunlight, rain, wind, or other elements. Before the stroke, it's okay to accept that. However, keep in mind the two previous parts about especially the caddy on extension of the line before or once the player begins to take a stroke, because that's something that the professional level, I think they are going to have to be careful about. Is that imagine, it's raining, and often you see the caddy hold the umbrella over the player's head, especially on the putting green, and almost until the player takes the putter back. The caddy's going to have to be careful when he does that, not to stand on extension of the line. So that's going to be very interesting. So far, they haven't had any rainy conditions, but inevitably that will happen. And the caddies and players need to be careful about that. All right, now speaking of caddies, let's look at 10.3. Purpose of the rule: player may have a caddy to carry the clubs and give advice and other help, but there are limits to what the caddy may do. The player is responsible for the player's actions during the round and will get a penalty if the caddy breaches the rules. All right, first part. Player allowed only one caddy at a time. Player may have a caddy to carry, transport, handle his clubs, give advice, and help him or her in other ways, but with these limitations: only one caddy at a time. The player may change caddies during a round, but must not do so temporarily for the sole purpose of getting advice from the new caddy. So that was the old decision where, the question had come up that, could a player who's having a really bad round all of a sudden have his swing coach, let's say Butch Harmon's following him around, caddy for him for half a hole, just to be able to say, hey, you know, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're not doing this. That is not allowed. And then that next paragraph formalizes what we mentioned earlier. Whether or not the player is a caddy, any other person who walks or rides along with the player or who carries things for the player, such as a rain suit or food, is not the player's caddy unless that person is named as such by the player or also carries or handles the player's clubs. So again, the parent carrying the rain suit or the lunch is not the child's caddy. 2 or more players may share a caddy, and if there's a rules issue involving a specific action of a shared caddy, and it needs to be decided which player the action was taken for, this is what we say. If the caddy's action was taken in the specific direction of one player, the action was taken for that player. So different words, but same meaning as before. Now, if none of those players specifically directed that action, the action is treated as taken for the player sharing the caddy whose ball was involved. So let's say that Ken and Bill are sharing me as a caddy, and we're walking down the fairway, and I kick Bill's ball. We weren't looking for it. Then what would be the ruling? Then I would be considered Bill's caddy, so Bill would be penalized, and 1 stroke and would replace the ball. So really no change in meaning from before, just different words. Now look at the penalty statement, and this is different. The player gets the general penalty for each hole during which he or she is helped by more than 1 caddy at any time. If the breach happens between holes, the player gets the general penalty on the next hole. Now, one thing that's different with this is what? There's no more maximum penalty. Before, there was the maximum penalty of 4 strokes in stroke play. And now, in theory, if a player plays a full round with 2 caddies and doesn't wise up to the fact that he or she shouldn't, that would be a 36 stroke penalty. And likewise, it's the other thing that's different is that in match play, the penalty is not an adjustment to the state of the match. Rather, the penalty is now just straight loss of hole. So if a player has 2 caddies at the first hole, he just flat out loses the first hole. All right, now next section, 10.3b, is just a nice summary. It's related to an old decision there was that, but it just puts it in the rule itself to talk about what the caddy may do. And notice that it says a caddy may always take these actions when allowed under the rules, such as to carry, transport, and handle the player's clubs, search for a player's ball, give information, advice, and other help, smooth bunkers and other actions to care for the course, remove sand and loose soil and repair damage on the putting green, as the player himself could do that, remove or attend the flagstick. And then this next one is new for this year, so you might make a note of it. Mark the spot of the player's ball and lift and replace the ball on the putting green only. So now, let's say that I'm caddying for Ken and Bill, and I get up to the putting green first. Their balls are both on the putting green. That without their authority, I can now go up, mark the spot of each ball, lift each ball, clean it, and as we'll see, I could even replace it. So that's something that's good. And something that happens, say, especially at the club level, a lot, because caddies figure, well, I'm in the service business. In an ideal world, before a player even gets to his ball, I'll have lifted, cleaned it, and replaced it. So it's oriented in a nice way. And now caddies can do that on their own. Previously, a caddy could do that only with the player's authority. The caddy is allowed to clean the player's ball or remove loose impediments and movable obstructions. All right, now the second part, actions allowed only with the player's authorization. The caddy may take these actions only when the rules allow the player to take them, and only with the player's authorization, which has to be given each time rather than just a blanket statement for the round. And that is, as Dan covered under Rule 8.1D, restore conditions that were worsened after the player's ball came to rest. Or when the player's ball is anywhere except on the putting green, lift the ball under rule requiring it to be replaced or after the player has decided to take relief. All right, now actions not allowed. The caddy may not concede the next stroke, hole, or match. Only the player himself may do that. And the player, as we just saw, the caddy may not deliberately stand on or close to an extension of line of play behind the player's ball when the player begins taking the stance. Caddy may not, let's talk about this, replace a ball unless the caddy had first lifted or moved the ball. And we'll talk about this more next time on Rule 14, but very quickly for now, let's say I'm Bill's caddy. If I lift Bill's ball, I could replace it. But if Bill lifts his ball, then I could not replace it. And we'll go into more detail next week, as with the next section about dropping or replacing a ball. Also, the caddy may not decide to take relief under rule. The caddy may advise the player to do so, but the player must decide. So, for example, even if in the black and white situation where the caddy gets to the player's ball before the player, and the player's ball is clearly unplayable in the middle of a big, thick, ugly, prickly bush, the caddy may not just lift the ball and say, my player is going unplayable. He has to wait for the player to make that decision. Then the last section, player responsible for the caddy's actions in breach of the rules. The player is responsible for his or her caddy's actions both during the round and while play is stopped, but not before or after a round. Caddy's action, so no change there for this year. If the caddy's action breaches a rule or would breach a rule if the action was taken by the player gets the penalty under that rule. So again, something that's nicely and explicitly stated for the first time. So in other words, if the player may not do something, then the caddy may not do that either. So for example, that means that the caddy may not give advice to another player during the round. When application of a rule depends on whether the player is aware of certain facts, the player's knowledge is treated as including whatever is known by his or her caddy. So for example, let's say I hit I'm caddying for Bill. He hits his tee shot towards out of bounds, and I get up to the area first, and on my way up, I saw a homeowner just pick the ball up from his yard and toss it back onto the course. Then by the time Bill gets up there, Bill didn't see this. He says, "Oh, great, I got a good break. My ball's in bounds." And I say nothing, and Bill plays. Well, Bill is considered to know what I know, so therefore Bill's considered to know that his ball had been out of bounds.
It actually happened in LPGA that last fall.
Yeah, it did. It did.
Homeowner threw it back in?
And the parent. And the parent of one of the girl players threw it back in, and the caddy saw it. And the player, he told the player that she threw it in, and the parent denied it. And the player played on without calling a rules official, and she got disqualified.
Yeah, it was an ugly event. It was at Pinehurst. I think was it at their Q school or the step
It was a
before the
Q
final?
school, yeah.
And the caddy publicly
Yeah.
basically called the player a liar, in effect, as I recall. And it was. I'm not sure what the final resolution was, but it was ugly. All right. Well, let's see. Why don't we? How about we'll go through Rule 11, and then we'll take a break, and we'll let Dan take over. All right. Rule 11. First point: no definitions to cover in this rule. This rule talks about a ball in motion that accidentally hits a person animal or object. And then it also goes on to talk about how to treat deliberate actions to affect a ball in motion. Purpose of the rule. It covers what to do if the player's ball in motion hits a person, animal, equipment, or anything else. When this happens accidentally, there's no penalty, and the player normally must accept the result, whether good or bad, and play the ball from where it comes to rest. It also restricts a player from deliberately taking actions to affect where any ball in motion might come to rest. So there's an accidental part, and then there's a deliberate part. So first we'll talk about accidental, and we'll see some changes in this for 2019. 11.1a. If a player's ball in motion accidentally hits any person or outside influence, there's no penalty to anyone. And this is true even if the ball hits the player, the opponent, or any other player or their caddies or equipment. So this is a change that, if I'm hitting a bunker shot, the ball hits the lip, comes back and strikes me, no penalty. That previously I was penalized for that. And also, keep in mind that now if in match play, I hit the ball, say my ball hits a tree and then strikes my opponent, previously I had a choice as to what to do, but now no longer a choice. There's an exception if the ball played from the putting green and stroke play, and this is the same as it was before. If the player's ball in motion hits another ball at rest on the putting green and both balls were on the putting green before the stroke, the player gets the general penalty. So as we talked about before, that provision is in there just so that the player putting has every incentive to ask the owner of the other ball to lift his ball, so that they will not he will not use it as a backstop. So no change for that exception. But again, keep in mind that applies only in stroke play. Rule 11.1b. Now it talks about, we talked about how there's no penalty. Now we'll talk about where you play the ball from. If the ball in motion accidentally hits a person or outside influence, the ball must be played as it lies. But there are two exceptions. First of which is if the ball anywhere except on the putting green, if the ball comes to rest on any person, animal, or moving outside influence, so sometimes you see videos of the tour level of a player, it's a tee shot and winds up in a spectator's pocket or something like that. Player must not play the ball as it lies and must take relief. And then it goes on to talk about how to take relief. Except on the putting green, the player is going to drop the ball in this relief area, using as the reference point the estimated point right under where the ball first came to rest in that person, animal, or outside influence. And this is new for this year, and we'll get into the details or the procedures for dropping and relief areas and all that really more in the next two sessions. But now the player is able to measure one club length from there. And the limits on that must be in the same area of the course. So if this happens in the general area, it has to stay in the general area, and it must not be near the hole. Now, if this was happened on the putting green somehow, then the player would place the original ball or another ball on the estimated spot under where the ball came to rest. So there's no club length provision on the putting green. And then exception 2, which is similar but not quite identical to the previous rules. If the ball played from the putting green accidentally hits a person, animal, or movable obstruction on the putting green. So what is one item that's missing from that list?
Lobster.
Now, how about a leaf, a loose impediment?
Yeah. Natural lobster.
That the stroke does not count, and the original ball or another ball must be replaced on the original spot, except in these cases. And that is if you hit a putt and that hits another ball at rest or a ball marker, then you, out of necessity, will play the ball as it lies. Or if the ball in motion accidentally hits the flag stick or the person attending it, then we go to Rule 13, which Dan will cover later to find out what the result is. So you had, I know, was it Dan and I think Gary, were you there? Was it on your fourth hole, beloved fourth hole at University Ridge, where a mouse deflected a player's ball? Or it was hole 6. Okay. Or, you know, so a mouse, hit, you know, clearly an animal, deflects a player's putt. So what's the correct ruling? The stroke does not count, and the player must replay the stroke. So one thing that's no longer included is, in looking at this, what's the ruling if a player putts and a leaf is blowing across the green and strikes and deflects the player's ball? You know, and this is a change that the player would then play the ball as it lies. So this is a little bit different than before. Similar, but not quite the same. Now, you know, looking at the penalty statement is, you know, we think, well, okay, so how would a player get the general penalty when we've just said that there's no penalty for the accidental deflection? That is, if, for example, the player does not play the ball from the right spot. So in the case with the mouse, if the player hits a putt and it strikes a person, or let's say the mouse, the player does not replay, instead plays from where the ball came to rest, the player has played from the wrong place. The stroke does not count no matter what, but the player did play from one place. The player should have played from original spot A, but instead played from spot B, so there'd be a wrong place penalty, and then the committee would need to decide whether there could be a serious breach of playing from the wrong place when you compare those two spots. All right, so 11.1 talks about accidental deflections, and we've and how there's not no longer a penalty for accidental deflections. Now we'll talk about deliberate actions taken with regard to a ball in motion. 11.2a, when does this rule apply? It applies when it's known or virtually certain that a ball in motion was deliberately deflected or stopped by a person. So by a person. So in other words, if a dog intentionally runs out and then stops a ball, this rule does not apply. That would be more under the previous version. That which is when a person deliberately touches the ball in motion, or the ball in motion hits any equipment or other object, or any person that a player deliberately positioned or left in a particular location so that the equipment, object, or person might deflect or stop the ball in motion. So there's some new information in here. And let's take a look at interpretation 11.2a/1, which gives some helpful examples. They're on page 161 of the official guide for those who have their books. It says, Rule 11.2 applies to a situation where a player did not initially position the equipment or other object or person for the purpose of deflecting the ball, but once that object or person was positioned by the player, he or she then realized that it might deflect or stop the ball, and therefore makes the decision to leave it as it is. So an example where there is a penalty. After raking a bunker, a player places the rake between the putting green and the bunker without any thought of it influencing the ball. The player, who now has a downhill putt toward the bunker, realizes the rake might stop his or her ball and plays without first moving the rake. The player putts and the ball is stopped by the rake. Okay, so in that case, what has happened? That the player, a couple of key points there. One, the player did not initially put the rake there for that purpose, but the player, before playing the ball, realized the rake was there and made a deliberate decision to leave the rake there, which therefore placed the player in jeopardy. Now, one point with this is, notice, when does this rule apply? Look at the very first part. It applies when a player's ball in motion was deliberately deflected or stopped. So what does that mean? If the ball had never struck the rake, in this case, would there be a breach? In that case, there would be no breach, which is kind of an interesting point. So it's a little bit more of a no harm, no foul type approach to the rules. And then the second example in that interpretation is that the rake's been left by a preceding group. Player has a downhill putt, sees the rake and wants to leave it there because it might stop the ball. The player putts, the ball stopped by the rake. So there is not a penalty there. Why?
Because he's playing the course as he found it.
That's right. He's playing the course as he found it, and the object was not placed there initially by the player. It was placed there initially by someone else. So as Phil said, that's just a good example of playing the course as you find it. All right. The exception, which we talked about under a few weeks ago under Rule 3, that if an opponent's ball in motion is deliberately deflected or stopped at a time when there's no reasonable chance it can be holed, and when this is done either as a concession or when the ball needed to be holed to tie the hole, this is covered by Rule 3, not by this rule. Remember the situation of the President's Cup with Jordan Spieth and how that's a necessary, or this exception is necessary to say that, you know, if Dan is putting to tie me, his ball goes past the hole, and I just have courtesy knock it back to him, that I'm not penalized, even though I did deliberately influence a ball in motion. Let's see. All right, Rule 11.2b, when the penalty applies to the player. Player gets the general penalty if he or she deliberately deflects or stops any ball in motion. So the penalty if there's that deliberate deflection. This is true whether it's the player's own ball or a ball played by someone else. Exception is the ball moving in water, because the player may lift the ball moving in water when taking relief. 11.2c, the place from where deliberately deflected or stopped ball must be played. So we've seen when this rule applies, when there's a penalty, and then penalty or no penalty, we need to know from where the player will play next. Now, if it's known or virtually certain that the ball in motion was deliberately deflected or stopped by a person, it must not be played as it lies. Instead, the player must take relief. Now, if the stroke was made anywhere except on the putting green, player will take relief based on the estimated spot where the ball would have come to rest if not deflected or stopped. So this will require some judgment to determine this. When ball would have come to rest anywhere on the course except on the putting green, the player must drop the original ball or another ball in the relief area. The reference point is the estimated spot. And remember, anytime the player, under the new rules, anytime the player's dropping the ball, the player will always be dropping within at least one club length area. The relief area must be in the same area of the course as the reference point. It must not be nearer the hole than the reference point. Now, if the ball would have come to rest on the putting green, the player must place the original ball or another ball on the estimated spot where the ball would have come to rest, using the procedures for replacing the ball under Rule 14. And if the ball would have come to rest out of bounds, then the player needs to proceed as if the ball had come to rest out of bounds. Now, if the stroke had been made from the putting green, the stroke does not count, and the player must play a ball from that original spot again. All right, last section, 11.3. Deliberately moving objects or altering conditions to affect ball in motion. When a ball is in motion, a player must not deliberately take any of these actions to affect where a ball, whether a player's own ball or another ball, might come to rest. First, alter physical conditions by taking any of the actions listed under Rule 8.1a, with the conditions affecting the stroke, such as pressing replacing a divot or pressing down a raised area of turf. Player may not lift or move a loose impediment or movable obstruction while a ball is in motion. And then the exception, though, is that this rule does not prohibit a player from lifting or moving a removed flag stick, a ball at rest on the putting green, and that is a change for this year. Being able to lift the ball on the putting green or any other equipment is okay. And one point with this, let's see, I think there's an interpretation is, and we won't go through it, but just the title is interesting, 11.3/1. Outcome of deliberate actions to affect ball in motion is irrelevant. That the player, as the first paragraph states, the player is in breach of this rule even if the deliberate action does not affect where the ball comes to rest. So this is something interesting to keep in mind, that if, let's say, I see Bill's ball heading towards a bunker, but there's a rake short of that bunker, and I say, oh no, Bill's ball might hit the rake and not go in the bunker. I want to make sure his ball goes in the bunker. the match is not going well at that point. And so I rush over and remove that rake. Now, does it matter what Bill's ball actually does? No, it does not, because as soon as I rush over and remove that rake while Bill's ball's in motion for that purpose, I'm penalized, aren't I? Now, compare that to Rule 11.2. 11.2a, this rule applies only when it's known or virtually certain that a player's ball in motion was deliberately deflected or stopped. So let's say, similar situation, I say, oh no, Bill's ball is going to go in the bunker. And I go over and I try to stop his ball in motion by putting my club down in front of it. But I miss. And the ball goes right by my club and into the bunker. What's the ruling in that case? Then there's no penalty, right? Because there was no deflection. So it's just a little twist, something's to be mindful of, how the different standards in those rules and when the penalties apply.
Why is it?
That's a good question, Ken. Why is that? I don't know.
That's a good answer.
It's an honest answer. That's all I can say. All right, well, that is it for Rule 11. Why don't we take, say, a 15-minute break? We'll resume at 10:15, and Dan will take us through Rules 12 and 13. Together, and you hit my ball's beyond the hole. You hit your putt too strong. I say, oh my gosh, his ball might strike mine, and in stroke play that'd be a 2-stroke penalty for Gary. I'm allowed to go over and lift my ball, but I need to be very quick because why? I got to mark it first, right? So that's now okay. Yeah, Dan.
So outcome based versus not outcome based. And thinking about that, this is Ken's question. It seems to me the reason that they did it is if your ball is at rest and then you do something, you will know to a certainty whether it did or did not affect it. So there's no reason to give you a penalty unless it happens. If the ball is in motion and you do something, such as pull the flag stick out, you do not know whether that pulling the flag stick while the ball was in motion would or would not have helped. So therefore, we're going to give the penalty for doing the act, not for the actual touching. You buy that?
In some cases, yes, but in other cases, I mean, like for example, imagine something big like a rake line here, and the ball's heading this way. Then the ball winds up behind it. I think it's a fair conclusion to say that
Okay, I think we're back. What do you need, John?
I want to know if the nameplate's got switched so we know it's ahead of the table.
No, the nameplate here has not changed. So we're going to be covering Rule 12 and 13, starting off with Rule 12, which is basically the old Rule 13.4. And the beauty of Rule 12 is it's only 3 pages long. And the extra beauty of it is a third of those pages are illustrations. So it's only 2 pages long to know Rule 12. So let's start off with the notable changes to Rule 12. Number 1, walls and lips are not part of the bunker. Second change, there is a relaxed restrictions on touching the sand when the ball is in the bunker. And the third notable change is loose impediments may be removed without penalty. The only definition I want to start with is the word bunker. Which is on page 201. Bunker. A specially prepared area of sand, which is often a hollow from which turf or soil was removed. And then these are not part of the bunker, and this is the change. A lip, wall, or face at the edge of a prepared area and consisting of soil, grass, or stacked turf or artificial material. So that's not part of a bunker. Soil and other growing or attached natural objects, such as grass, bushes, or trees. Third, sand that spills over or is outside the edge of the prepared area. And the fourth bullet point, all other areas of sand on the course that are not inside the edge of a prepared area, such as, then it goes on, generally called waste areas. So if you play Sand Valley, if you have the privilege of playing that, anytime your ball is a little bit off the fairway, your ball is in sand, but it's never in a bunker. It's just in sand. That's what they're talking about. That's not part of a bunker. Bunkers are one of the defined areas of the course, one of the 5. And then just a couple of notes for the committee. The committee may define a prepared area of sand as part of the general area, which means it's not part of the bunker. When a bunker is being repaired, the committee defines the entire bunker as ground under repair, and then it's treated as part of the general area. And then the word sand includes similar material and any soil that's mixed in with it. So let's go back and go through Rule 12. 12.1. When ball is in bunker. A ball is in a bunker when any part of the ball touches sand on the ground inside the edge of the bunker. So if you look at the illustration on the preceding page, the left check mark, green check mark is the ball is in the bunker. It's also in the bunker if it's inside the edge of the bunker and rests on ground where sand normally would be, such as where sand was blown away, or is in or on a loose impediment, a movable obstruction, abnormal course condition, or integral object. So an example of movable obstruction, if you look at the illustration on the left-hand page, you'll see that the ball is sitting on top of a rake. That green check mark means that the ball is in the bunker. It is on a movable obstruction. Then if you go to the next sentence, it says, if a ball lies on soil or grass or other growing or attached natural object, and that's the key, it has to be a natural object, attached natural object, the ball's not in the bunker. So if you look at the little island in the center of that green, that ball is on grass, and you see the red check mark or X saying the ball is not in. And also you see the top left red X where the ball is not in the bunker, and it looks like it's embedded in either stacked turf or the lip of the bunker, and the ball is not in the bunker in that situation. And the last sentence under 12.1, if part of the ball is in both in a bunker and another area of the course, see Rule 2.2c. 2.2c we covered before. It's a rule that you probably should know off the top of your head. What it does is it has two parts to it. It says if a ball is in the general area and one of the four specific areas, it's always going to be in the specific area. The second part of 2.2c says if a ball is in one of the specific areas of the course, it is in the area such as in this order: a penalty area, a bunker, and a putting green. And the way you remember those is it's in the most severe part of the course. So if it's in a bunker and a penalty area, then the ball is going to be in the penalty area. If it's in a bunker and a green, kind of hard to imagine, but if that's the case, the ball is going to be in the bunker. All right, 12.2. Playing ball in bunker. This rule applies both during a round and while play is stopped. 2.2a. Removing loose impediments and movable obstructions. And let me go back to the purpose of the rule before we cover this. Rule 12 is a specific rule for bunkers, which are specially prepared areas intended to test the player's ability to play a ball from sand. When you look at the purpose of these rules, and this is very helpful in deciding what this is about, it does not say it's to test the player's ability to play a ball from sand while standing on leaves, nor does it say while having to play around black walnuts that dropped into a bunker. What it says is the challenge is the ability to play ball from the sand. So now when we talk about 12.2a and 12.2b, we're going to see that the restrictions have to do with the sand themselves. So 12.2a, before playing a ball in a bunker, a player may remove loose impediments under Rule 15.1 and loose impediments under 15.2. Movable obstructions under 15.2. So that's a big change. You could have moved movable obstructions before. Now you can actually move loose impediments. So those who do the state girls tournament in October, especially on the back nine, rules 13, 14, 15, when the black walnuts fall out of the trees, or on the ninth hole when the black walnuts fall out of the trees, the high school girls will now be able to move those without getting a penalty. They always moved them in the past, but in the past they got a penalty. Now they can do it without it. And the next sentence is important, which we will see. This includes any reasonable touching or moving of the sand in the bunker that happens while doing so. Notice the word reasonable, and the example, and there's an interpretation on this, and I mentioned it before. If there's a pine cone or a black walnut directly behind the ball, you can reach down and pick it up. If you move a little sand, there's no problem. What you can't do, because this would be unreasonable, is to push the walnut into the ground, into the sand, and then drag it back behind the ball, sort of creating a better lie for the ball. You must use a reasonable amount of touching. 12.2b, restrictions on touching sand in the bunker. Again, I've mentioned this before, and so has John. The heading of the rules are extremely important to tell you what is in the rule. And often just by reading the heading or the title, you know pretty much what is going on here. Notice that it says restrictions on touching sand in bunker. It doesn't say restrictions on touching water in a bunker or ground in a bunker or anything else. It talks about sand. 12.2b1. When touching sand results in a penalty. Before making a stroke at a ball in a bunker, a player must not, and here are the 2 bullet points, deliberately touch sand in the bunker with a hand, club, rake, or other object to test the condition of the sand to learn information for the next stroke. This is an example where, and this touches on something that Gary asked earlier. You'll notice the term deliberate. And throughout the rules, in the majority of cases, anytime you see the word deliberate, it's paired with a particular action that you're not allowed to do. And this is a good example. Notice that this does not prohibit you from deliberately touching the sand. That's only half of it. It only prohibits you from deliberately touching the sand for the very specific purpose of testing the condition of the sand to learn information for the next stroke. Example, your ball's in a bunker and you want to move a loose impediment. Can you deliberately touch the sand? Yes. You have to reasonably, but you can deliberately touch the sand. What if your ball is in a bunker next to a drain and you're concerned that the drain may be under where your ball lies, and so you want to probe in the sand with a T to see under where your ball lies that's where the drain is, because obviously you don't want to take a stroke and hit that drain. Can you do that? And the answer is yes. Notice that you are deliberately touching the sand, but there's no prohibition because you're not testing the condition of the sand to learn information for the next stroke. You are touching the sand deliberately for the purposes of seeing if there is an object underneath where the, where the stroke will be made. Second bullet point. Touch sand in the bunker with a club in the area right in front of or right behind the ball, in making a practice swing or making the backswing for a stroke. So we still have that prohibition about touching the sand with a club, either right in front or right behind, or making a practice swing or a practice stroke. So
There's a change this year. John, you may remember this from our class in Portland, but you can make a practice swing now in a nearby bunker. And it's because it specifically says touching the sand in the bunker.
that's correct.
And so that's a change.
Yeah, I remember. Line this.
So let's go on to sub 2 on the next page, parent 2. When touching sand does not result in a penalty. So before we go through these 6, notice the but a third of the way down the page. But the player gets the general penalty is if his or her actions in touching the sand improve the conditions affecting the stroke in breach of 8.1a. So let's look at these. You are permitted to dig in with the feet to make a stance for a practice swing or a stroke. You are able to smooth the bunker to care for the course. You say, well, wait a minute. If you're in a bunker, does that mean if there are footprints not on your line of play that you can then smooth that sand if you're going to care for the course? And the answer is yes. If it's directly on your line of play, you can't do it. Why? Because the but says if his or her actions in touching the sand improves the conditions affecting the stroke in breach of Rule 8.1a. And as we talked about last week, that would be a breach of 8.1a to smooth the sand on your line of play. Third, you can place clubs, equipment, or other objects in the bunker, whether by throwing or setting them down. This is a change. Under the old rules, if you threw it into the bunker, it was a penalty. Now, you can actually throw it. I guess a caution there, generally the term throw implies anger. Here, I think what they're talking about is that you can gently throw it into the bunker, but there is no prohibition even if you do it in anger. You can do it in measuring, marking, lifting, or replacing. Next bullet point, and this is a change, you can lean on a club to rest. You couldn't do that before. And I remember the girls' state high school tournament, a girl would be in the bunker and it would be her turn to play. And as any human being is, you kind of want to rest. And so the girl would put her club down into the bunker. Automatic 2-stroke penalty. Under the new rules, there is no penalty if you're just leaning on the club to rest. And lastly, striking the sand in frustration or anger. That's the Arnold Palmer decision from the Masters of many years ago. If you hit a ball in a bunker and you advance it forward in the bunker, but it doesn't go out of the bunker under the old rules, and you then are angry because you didn't get it out, you smash the club into the sand. Under the old rules, you got a penalty. And now what they're saying is that you no longer will get a penalty. Parent 3, no restrictions after ball is played out of bunker. You'll recognize this was exception 2 to the old 13-4. A ball in a bunker is played and is outside the bunker. The player may touch sand in the bunker without penalty. Bullet point 2, smooth sand in the bunker to care for the course. And this is true even if the ball comes to rest outside the bunker and the player is required or allowed to, by the rule, to take stroke and distance. Or next bullet point, the sand in the bunker is on the player's line of play for the next stroke from outside the bunker. So let's take an example of that. Your ball is in a bunker by the green. You blade it, it goes out of bounds. Can you rake the bunker before you drop under stroke and distance? Yes, that's exactly what this is contemplating. The next bullet point says sand in the bunker is on the player's line of play for the next stroke. An example of that is that you are in a bunker with a very severe lip and you're towards the front. Your only shot is to chip or pitch the ball backwards out of the hole, out of the bunker. So now you pitch it outside the bunker, and now those footprints are directly on your line of play. What this is saying is since the ball is now out of the bunker, you may rake or smooth that bunker, and you can do it without restriction. The last thing to know about the phrase in parent 3 that says no restrictions after ball is played out of bunker is that this also applies to taking relief outside a bunker. It would have been nice if the rule said that, but it is what it is. But an interpretation has been issued that says, and this is 12.2b parent 3/1, that says taking relief is the same thing as playing out of a bunker. So what that means is if your ball is in the bunker and you then decide that you want to go back on the line and take relief outside the bunker and you drop your ball, you have not played out of the bunker, but you have taken relief out of the bunker, and then it's treated the same as if you had played it out, which means even though there is footprints directly on your line of play, you are able to smooth the bunker. All right, 12.3. 12.3 is a rule that's really not a rule. It's just a roadmap that says, okay, folks, here's 3 rules to look at. And it tells you that if your ball is in a bunker, you may want to look at abnormal course conditions, 16.1c, interference by dangerous animal conditions, 16.2, and unplayable ball, 19.3. All right, that is Rule 12. It is short, sweet. Any questions on that? All right. Rule 13, putting greens. This is the old Rule 16, putting greens, and the old Rule 17, dealing with flagstick. And 13 is divided into 3 rules. 13.1 is the putting green, 13.2 is the flagstick, and 13.3 is ball overhanging hole. Notable changes in Rule 13. Almost all damage to the putting green may now be repaired. Second notable change. There's no penalty for any accidental movement of a ball or ball marker on the putting green. Third, if a player's ball has been lifted or moved and the ball then moves after being replaced, the ball now owns the spot and the player will play from that spot no matter what caused the ball to move. John has already touched on these 2 points. 4, interference from a wrong green now includes the player's stance and area of swing in addition to the lie of the ball. And the fifth notable change is players may now leave the flag stick in the hole when playing from anywhere and gets no penalty if his or her ball in motion strikes it. And if anyone's watched television over the last month, that is the most notable change for anyone who is watching. The tournament at Torrey Pines, I think it was this weekend, last weekend, showed one of the leaders, Adam Scott, putting with the flag stick on virtually every putt, from 3 feet, from 20 feet, from 1 feet. He didn't care. He left the flag stick in the hole. Definitions under Rule 13. First one to look at is flag stick. Page 204. Flag stick, a movable pole provided by the committee that is placed in the hole to show players where the hole is. The flag stick includes the flag and any other material or objects attached to the pole. Not much there, that's the same as it was before. The flag is part of the flag stick. Next is hole. Next page. Hole, the finishing point on the putting green for the hole being played. The hole must be 4 1/4 diameter and at least 4 inches deep. It is surprising how often this shows up on the national exam, and the question always is as follows. True or false? The hole is 4 1/4 inches in diameter and must be at least 5 inches deep. And the answer is it's false. And you say, well, how am I going to remember that? The easy way to remember it is it's the same number. It's 4 and 4. So if you know that it's 4 1/4, which most people do, then you can remember that the depth is 4 as well. If a lining is used, its outer diameter must not exceed 4 1/4. And the last part, the word hole, when not used as a definition. And as you know, anytime you have a definition in the rules, it's always italicized. So if the word hole is used non-italicized, it's not a defined term, but simply means the hole that you're playing. So like the 5th hole or the 8th hole or whatever. Next definition is hold. When a ball is at rest in the hole after a stroke and the entire ball is below the surface of the putting green. That was the old definition, and that still exists. When a ball refers to holding out or hold out, it means when the player's ball is hold. And this next line is the big change. For the special case of a ball resting against a flag stick in the hole, see 13.2c, and we're going to go over that in great detail. A ball is treated at hold if any part of the ball is below the surface of the putting green. In my opinion, this is not a special case. In my opinion, this is 99% of the time is going to be right under this 3rd paragraph, and it's not going to be under the 1st paragraph. But we'll cover this in 13.2c in just a minute. Putting green, let's look at the definition of that. Putting green, the area on the hole the player is playing that is specially prepared for putting. Again, if you're taking the national exam, the question they always ask is a putting green is something that is specially prepared for putting or chipping. And the answer is false, because a putting green is only something that is specially prepared for putting. The committee has defined as the putting green, or the putting green for a hole containing the hole in which the player tries to play a ball. Putting green is one of the 5 defined areas of the course. Next paragraph. The edge of the putting green is defined by where it can be seen that the specially prepared area starts, unless the committee defines the edge in a different way, such as using lines or dots. Last time I played Erin Hills on the 8th hole, they shaved that so close on the front of the 8th hole that they've had to put dots there to show you where the putting green is and where the fairway is. John, is that still the case?
It's rare.
Rare, okay. But sometimes you will see that it is where the dots and lines are.
And they haven't
Yeah.
2019, they haven't done.
They can't find the.
If a double green is used for two different holes, the entire prepared area containing both holes is treated as the putting green when playing each hole. So an example, at least in the Madison area, is Spring Green. The 9th and the 18th holes are one large putting green, and it is probably 200 feet, maybe 300 feet from one side of the edge of the 9th to the edge of the 18th green. The whole thing is considered a putting green. But the committee may define an edge that divides the double green into two different putting greens so that when a player is playing one of the holes, the part of the double green on the side of the edge that is used for the other hole is a wrong green. Generally speaking, this is a bad idea, and I don't think you've ever done this, have you, Bill?
We're gonna be making that decision in 2021. I'll tell you.
Okay.
Westmore Country Club has the same thing as Spring Green.
And the issue there is if the committee does divide the green, the key is that you can't pick up and mark your ball on the other green. Why? Because it's not another green. It's the general area. And that sort of goes against common sense to think your ball's on what you think is a putting green, and you then can't pick it up. The other thing that is interesting is if it's marked as a wrong green, we'll see in just a minute, you can't play it as it lies. You're required to take relief. So when the committee sets that up, it has to make sure that the players understand that that other green is truly a wrong green for which relief is mandatory.
Is that always the case, Dan? That would be considered a wrong green, or sometimes it is the general area?
A wrong green, by definition, is the general area. There's nothing else that it can be.
John, at the Open Championship, there are quite a few double greens, are there not?
Every 5 or so years.
Do they generally define the edge, so to say?
Oh, no, they treat them all as one huge green.
That would be my inclination for Westmore's 10th and 14th hole.
You avoid the two bad results of somebody marking a ball what they think is on the putting green when it's not the putting green, it's the general area.
Or the 10th and 14th holes at Westmore. The greens, putting greens are now connected.
And, and also sometimes if you do treat them as, if you split them up, you can wind up with some strange relief procedures.
Correct.
That would be a very, very different shot than
Last definition I want to go over is wrong green, page 222. Notice the wording change there. It's not wrong putting green, it's wrong green. And it means any green on the course other than the putting green for the hole the player is playing. Wrong green includes the putting green for all other holes that the player is not playing at the time. So if you're playing one of the holes, the other 17 holes on the course are by definition a wrong green. Also, the normal putting green from a hole when a temporary green is being used. And last, all practice greens for putting, chipping, or pitching unless the committee excludes them by local rules. Here is an example where it says all practice greens for putting, chipping, or pitching. As an example, there are courses that often have internal practice areas for which you may have not only a putting green, but a chipping area. I know Westmore has one that's kind of in the middle of the course. I'm not sure how you would hit it on there. But anyways, what this is saying is that is a wrong green, not just if it is a, quote, putting green, but if it is a practice chipping or pitching green. So be careful of that one. And lastly, wrong greens are part of the general area. The wrong green is not a putting green. Why? Because the putting green is only the hole in which you are playing. All right, so let's go through Rule 13. As I said, there's three parts to it. 13.1 is putting green, 13.2 is flag stick, and 13.3 is ball overhanging hole. So let's do 13.1, dealing with putting greens. The rule purpose. The rule allows the player to do things on the putting green that are normally not allowed off the putting green, such as being allowed to mark, lift, clean, and replace a ball, and to repair damage and remove sand and loose soil on the putting green. There's no penalty for accidentally causing a ball or ball marker to move on the putting green. So notice that last phrase. We've now heard that many times, including in John's presentation. 13.1a. When ball is on putting green. A ball is on the putting green when any part of the ball touches the putting green. It is amazing how often you are called over, especially in a high school tournament, when a player says, "Hey, tell me, is this ball on the putting green or not?" And what it is, it's on the fringe, and the ball clearly overhangs the putting green, but it doesn't touch the putting green. This is saying the ball's not on the putting green unless it touches it. The second bullet point says it's also on the putting green if it lies on or in anything, such as a loose impediment or an obstruction, and is inside the edge. So an example of that is if the player calls you over and the ball is on the fringe, it's overhanging the edge, and it's resting on a piece of mud that is on the green and is attached to the ball. Is that ball on the putting green? And the answer is yes, because it is lying on or in anything, and it's inside the edge of the putting green. And then the phrase we've seen before, if part of the ball is on both the putting green and another, look at Rule 2.2c. And as you know, if it's the putting green in another specific area of the course, it's always going to be in the other specific area of the course, because the putting green is the least bad place to be. 13.1b, marking, lifting, and cleaning ball on putting green. A ball on the putting green may be lifted and cleaned. The spot must be marked before it's lifted, and the ball must be replaced on its original spot. Nothing there. We've seen that before, no change. 13.1c, improvements allowed on the putting green. During a round and while play is stopped, a player may take these two actions on the putting green, no matter whether the ball is on or off the putting green. So again, we're going to go through 1 and 2, but you can do them both no matter where the ball is, either on or off the green. Number 1, you have sand and soil on the putting green, but not anywhere else on the course, may be removed without penalty. This is not a change in the rules. That's always been the rules. What is a change is the definition of loose impediments, which we'll talk about next time. The old definition of loose impediments was that sand and soil were not loose impediments unless they were on the putting green. So if you're taking the national exam, this question is going to come up, and that is, what is sand and soil? And the answer is, it's never a loose impediment. But what this says is, if the sand and loose soil are on the putting green, you can remove them. So there's no change in outcome, just a change in definition. And number 2, repair of damage. Obviously, this is the biggie. This is a significant change. A player may repair damage on the putting green without penalty by taking reasonable actions, and we're going to be talking about this, reasonable actions to restore the putting green as nearly as possible to its original condition, but only. And notice the phrase "but only" is extremely limiting. Sometimes it'll say you can do it, and here are instances in which you can do it. That isn't what this says. What this says are those 2 bullet points are the only way that you can repair the damage. By using his or her hand, foot, or other part of the body, or normal ball, mark, repair tool, tee, club, or similar item of normal equipment. So it says hand, foot, or other body part. Hard to imagine what you would use other than your hand and your foot, but in theory you could bend down with your elbow and you could tap something down. And it talks about you can only do it with a normal ball mark, repair tool, tee, club, or similar item. Can you go to the bunker, get the rake that's in the bunker, and repair that? I would say no, because that is not a similar item of normal equipment, similar to a ball mark, repair tool, tee, or club. Example of something that would be, or other similar item, something that comes to my mind would be a ball. It's not on the list, but it seems to me you could take a ball and tap down some spike marks if you wanted, because that is a similar item of normal equipment. And of course, you can't do it without unreasonably delaying play. And you can't do it if it would unreasonably delay play. Then we have the but. But if the player improves the putting green by taking actions that exceed what is reasonable to restore the putting green to its original condition, such as creating a pathway to the hole or by using an object that is not allowed, you're going to get the general penalty. What this is cautioning you on is that you can repair the damage. You don't get to be better off than when the damage occurred. You can repair it up to the state of the damage, but you can't then say, oh, this is great, and you make a mark to the hole in which you can put it in. There's a rules decision, a rules interpretation that says damage to the hole is damage to the putting green. There was an old rules decision that treated damage to the hole differently than the putting green. Now damage to the hole is treated as damage to the putting green. The next part on page 100 is significant. It's the definition of damage on the putting green, and it has 4 bullet points. And then the but says damage on the putting green does not, and you have 4 bullet points. As we go through those, it's important to look at the pattern that those things are talking about. It makes it easier to remember. So let's go through the damage on the putting green that you can repair. A ball mark, shoe damage, spike marks, scrapes, indentation caused by equipment or flagstick. That's something that a human being does, right? Second bullet point, old hold plugs, turf plugs, seams of cut turf, and scrapes or indentation from maintenance tools or vehicles. Again, that's something that a human being does along with equipment that they have in their hand. The third item is an animal track or hoof indentation. So what this is saying is that damage on the putting green means any damage caused by animals. So it's a hoof mark, so forth. And the last of those 4 items is an embedded object, such as a stone or acorn. Under the old rules, if an acorn fell from the tree and it was embedded, the player could not pick the acorn out if it was solidly embedded, and the player could not then repair the hole in which the acorn was residing, because that would be repairing damage to the green. This reverses that. So if an acorn is solidly embedded into the putting green, you can pop that acorn out and then use your repair tool to pinch the corners in so that the putting green is flat.
Question.
Yes.
If the, a lot of times the squirrels or whatever bury nuts on the green, and if you dug that out and let's say it was like this big, could you put sand in there?
The question is, can you repair it by putting sand in the hole? The question that would go through my mind is, are you taking action that exceeds what is reasonable to restore the putting green to its original condition? My gut reaction says, and since you're limited to repair tools only, that you couldn't do that. You could pinch the corners in, and Dan, in your example, people online probably couldn't see it, but you're suggesting the hole is perhaps 1 inch to 1.5 inches in diameter. I think with a repair tool, you could get that such that the edges line up such that you would then be able to putt over it. John, do you disagree?
Yeah, I completely agree.
It's always good news when you say something and John Morissette says, I agree.
The clarifications that came out in December also alluded to hail damage repair being okay,
Okay,
which we hope we never have to come across.
all right. I was going to get to that.
Wasn't in that same deal, the original condition of a green did not have sand, does not have sand in the hole unless it's an aeration issue. And so you couldn't take sand from the sand trap and put in that hole because that wasn't the original condition of the green.
Right. That's a good point, Jim, and yet another reason why John Morissette was correct. All right, so let's look at the buts. Damage on putting green does not. So these 4 bullet points you cannot repair. And look at the list. The first one is normal practices, and emphasize the word normal. Normal practices for maintaining the overall condition of the putting green, such as aeration holes and grooves from vertical mowing. If you could repair aeration holes, it would be endless, because when you aerate the course, there are thousands of them. And of course, they're in a nice little row, and it would maybe take you a half hour to get them all done. So it is expressly excluded that you cannot repair aeration holes. And again, normal practices for maintenance. If you go up to the list on top, you'll see that if the maintenance tools or vehicles scrape or gouge the green, that you're able to repair, because that is not a, quote, normal practice for maintaining the overall condition. That's poor maintenance by the maintenance staff. So if they make a gouge, you can fix it. If there's an aeration hole, you can't. The last 3 points of that bullet point, I lump under the category of natural conditions, natural damage. So irrigation or rain or other natural forces. The rain pelts down, you can't repair it. Natural surface imperfections, such as weeds or areas of bare disease or uneven growth. And lastly, natural wear of the hull. As Bill alluded to, the USGA issued a clarification in December of 2018 having to do with hail. If you didn't know what the USGA said, which category would you put it in? Would you put it under the top, or would you put it under the bottom?
Bullet point number 2.
And I would submit, as Bill suggested, you would put it on bullet point number 2, because it is, or other natural forces. How can hail be anything other than other natural forces? However, our job is to apply the rules as promulgated by the USGA, and the USGA has told us that hail belongs on the top. So you may add, instead of the 4 bullet points, add a 5th bullet point on top, and it's the word hail. So if there is hail damage to the putting green, it can be repaired. I sounded overly harsh to the USGA. I apologize to that on that, but what their point is that hail is so unusual, and it creates a damage so dissimilar to rain that it's more akin to what is on the top rather than what is on the bottom. At least I assume that that's their explanation.
And the repair is very much like a ball.
And the pair is very much similar to a ball mark, as Bill has said. All right, 13.1D. Oh, one other thing. We still have the ability, if the committee wants, and if Bill wanted to set this up, you could have relief from aeration holes. In other words, it's not damage on the green from which you can repair, but the old local rule still permitted the committee to adopt it that said if your ball is in a aeration hole in the putting green, you get to put it in the nearest spot no nearer the hole, and if it's in the general area of the course, you get to drop it.
It is part of our hard card, so that is a local rule that all of you should be
So you
very
can't
familiar.
repair it, but you could get relief.
Yes.
If the ball lies
Right.
in or
Would that hold true for diseased turf?
No.
I have line of pot or.
No,
So I
it would
have-
not. And that rules decision, or excuse me, that local rule, for those who want to make a note, it's page 467 of the model rules, and it's just like it used to be under the old rules. All right, 13.1D. When ball or ball marker moves on putting green. There are 2 specific rules for a ball or ball marker that moves on the putting green. John has already talked about number 1, but it's worth going over one more time. This was precipitated to a large extent by the 2016 US Open, where Dustin Johnson at Oakmont was on the putting green. He took a practice swing from a 3-foot putt, sold his club, and the ball moved. And the question was, did he or did he not cause it to move, and where does he play from? Under the old rules, the standard was the weight of the evidence. So you had to decide by a 51% weight of the evidence, did he cause it to move or not? The rules official at the time said, yes, he did. Under the new rules, the standard would be, did he cause it to move by a 95% certainty? So there's a big difference there.
44%.
44%. Our engineer has told us the difference between 95 and 51 is, what'd you say? 44, thank you. So if the ball moves on the putting green, accidentally caused to move, you replace the ball on its original spot. Accidental means basically anything. You're other than deliberate. You're not paying attention. You're talking to somebody else. You move back, and the ball. You kick your shoe, and you move the ball. You drop your club on the ball. You drop the ball marker. There used to be a rules decision if you took a ball marker out of your pocket to mark the ball, and you dropped it from a foot above the ball, and the ball moved, that was a penalty. That's no longer the case. Accidental movement of the ball on the putting green. If the player or opponent deliberately lifts the ball, a ball marker, John talked about that earlier this morning. All right, one of my favorite changes under the rules is parent 2, when to replace a ball moved by natural forces. John talked about this earlier, and we're going to go through it in just a minute, but I like the old rule because it gave you the opportunity for the following trivia question. How can a player make a hole-in-one with 2 different balls? And the answer under the old rules was you hit your ball onto par 3, 3 feet from the hole. You then, instead of going up to mark your ball, your fellow competitor marks it for you because it's on his line. He puts it aside, he putts, he then puts the wrong ball back on that spot. The wind blows the ball into the hole. You've now gotten a hole-in-one using 2 balls. With this change,
He says, yeah, he did an improper substitution.
but you didn't make the improper substitution, your fellow competitor did. And if you make the improper substitution under the old rules, the USGA said that you got a 2-stroke penalty if you hold out, if you didn't redo it. And as I asked the USGA one time, but the rule said only if the substitution is followed by a stroke, and here it wasn't followed by a stroke, they took the position that it was still a penalty. But anyways, you could get a hole-in-one with 2 balls. So the new rules don't permit that to happen on the putting green. Why? Because if the wind blows the ball for any reason, and if it's been already lifted and replaced, you're going to put the ball back. However, you can still get a hole-in-one with 2 balls. And here's the way you do it. You hit your ball on a par 3, and instead of on the putting green, you're just on the edge of the putting green, on the fringe. And you go up there and you look down and you're standing on a sprinkler head. So you're going to take relief from the sprinkler head. You're taking relief. Can you substitute balls when you take relief? Yes, 6.2b or 6.3b1 says that. We covered that last time. So you drop another ball. It's now on the fringe. You walk back to your bag to get your putter. The wind comes up, blows the ball into the hole. You've now gotten a hole-in-one with 2 balls. John, not very likely?
I think we'll worry about that one.
Okay. All right, moving on. It was just a little side note. Thank you. 13.1e.
So then 2 balls on the hole and 1 trophy.
Yes. That was the final question I asked the USGA. Which ball do you put on the hole-in-one trophy? All right, 13.1E, no deliberate testing of greens. During a round and while play is stopped, a player must not deliberately take either of these actions to test the putting green or wrong green, rub the surface, or roll a ball. Here is another instance in which the word deliberately is used, coupled with an action. It is not enough to do only the deliberate action. You have to do it for the specific purpose. So, can you deliberately rub the surface of a putting green? The answer is yes, provided you are not doing it to test the putting green. Why would you rub a ball on the surface of the putting green? To clean it, to get the mud off it. So understand that you can take that action. And again, that's the concept of deliberate, usually couples with it a specific action. You take it for that specific action. Then the exception says testing greens when between two holes. This is consistent with the practice rule. If you can practice putt on the last hole that you played, you can rub the surface or roll a ball.
Isn't rolling a deliberate action in and of itself?
Yes, well, conceivably you could roll a ball accidentally. You have it here and you drop it, it rolls across the green. You're not intending to do it. But again, the key there is you must deliberately roll the ball, and it must be for the specific purpose of testing the putting green. So if you say, why did you accidentally drop that ball? It doesn't make any difference. If you say, why did you intentionally drop that ball? And the person says, because I was trying to clean it, unless they're a liar, they're off the hook. All right, 13.1F. Relief must be taken from wrong green. Meaning of interference by wrong green. Interference under this rule exists when any part of the player's ball touches a wrong green or lies on or in anything and is inside the edge, or, and this is the change, the wrong green physically interferes with the player's area of intended stance or area of intended swing. Again, the old rule was the relief was mandatory only for the lie. Now it is mandatory for the lie and the area of intended stance and swing. Relief must be taken. So again, it's not an option, you have to take it. This is parent 2. When there is interference by a wrong green, the player must not play the ball as it lies. Instead, the player must take free relief by dropping the original ball or another ball in the relief area. Next time, John is going to go on and talk about relief areas extensively, and that's going to be not only 14, but 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. This is an introduction. I'll touch on it briefly, but we're going to talk a lot about it next time. A relief area always has 3 component parts, always. It has a reference point, it has a size, and the size is always 1 club length, unless you're taking penalty lateral relief. And third, there are limitations on the location. Must be in the same area of the course as the reference point, must not be near the hole. So if you look at the...
Can you intentionally limit the relief area? I mean, say it says it's the longest club in your bag except for the putter. If you took a wedge and took 1 club length and then drop the ball slightly outside of it, are you still within the rule definition of 1 club length?
The question is, can you shorten the relief area by taking a club that is shorter than the longest club in the bag other than the putter? And the answer is no. The relief area will always be the size of the longest club in your bag other than the putter. So if you dropped it, if your driver was 43 inches and you measured with your putter, which is 36 inches, and you dropped it 40 inches away, you've dropped it in the relief area. Why? Because the relief area is 43 inches. John?
Even if you put two markers down saying this is my relief area.
Okay, I'm going to try one more time.
I got you. Okay.
The relief area is always going to be one club length, except in two situations, measured by the longest club in your bag other than a putter. You can use any club you want, but the relief area is always going to be that distance. And if you have a 43-inch driver, no matter what you do for the rest of that round, 43 inches is the size of your relief area.
The way I heard your question is if you use the sand wedge and you dropped and it landed somewhere, hopefully near the end of that sand wedge, such that it would be maybe outside the sand wedge, but inside
The 43-inch.
the 43-inch driver, you'd be fine.
I think the easiest way to understand it is to say that you don't need to use a club. You just have to get the ball in the right place, which means,
Right.
in this case, 43.
But the flip side to that is that you cannot manipulate the size of the relief area in hopes of getting the ability to eventually place it.
Right.
Because the relief area is always the distance of the longest club in your bag, other than the putter, no matter what club you measure. It's always, if you've got a 43-inch driver, and that's your longest club other than the putter, that's your relief area, 43 inches.
You're gonna have some kids who will use that wedge, drop it, it ends up outside where that wedge area would be, and will walk right over, pick it up, and thinks that they can re-drop it again.
And that's the beauty of having a rules official like you right on the spot. You're going to stop him from doing it before he picks it up. And if he does pick it up, you're going to assess appropriate penalty, right?
Absolutely.
There you go.
And when I see it from 90 yards away and go up there, and
You're gonna run up there with your kick. Right. Measure his driver length first and then see.
Let's look quickly at the diagram on page 103. The ball is lying at position A. The nearest point of complete relief, we'll go over that more when we get to Rule 16, but nearest point of complete relief, which is the new term for what used to be called nearest point of relief, is at P1. Why? Because the player has to get not just the ball off the putting green, but they have to get the player off, their feet off the putting green, their stance. So P1 is the spot that gets the feet as well as the ball off. That's your reference point. And then from there, you get your one club length and on you go. And let's look at then sub 3, no relief when clearly unreasonable. The old phrase that was often in the rules was this phrase that hurt my ears whenever I heard it. It was called clearly impracticable. And if you ask the rules official, they'd say, well, there's no difference between the word reasonable and impracticable. And under the new rules, the phrase is always going to be clearly unreasonable. The phrase clearly impracticable is gone. So let's take an example of when that would kick in which you would not get free relief. So your ball is at P1. It's in a terrible lie, and you are hoping that you're going to get your feet on the putting green so that you get free relief. And at P1 with your feet there, you would be hitting a wedge to that putting green at the top of the page. You decide instead, and it's only 60 yards, you decide instead that you're going to take your 3-wood. And when you take your 3-wood, your stance then miraculously gets on the putting green, and you say, Mr. Official, I think I'm entitled to relief. And the answer is no, if they have chosen a club that is unreasonable stance, swing, or choice of clubs. And so the person would have to convince you that they always play their 3-wood from 60 yards. And if they did it on every hole, I think you would say you get relief. But if they don't do that, then you're not going to get relief.
I have a subtle question, and maybe there's something I'm not seeing, but under 13.1F, item 2, the reference point says the nearest point of complete relief in the same area of the course where the original ball came to rest. Then you go down to bullet point, or the third bullet point under limits on location of relief area. and it says there must be complete relief from all interference by the wrong green. Isn't that implied with the reference point?
To me, it is, because if you're taking complete relief, that means you must have the ball as well as your stance and feet off of the putting green. And notice that the term wrong green is, by definition, the general area. So what that's saying is that you have to drop the ball in the general area. So example, if P1 were a bunker, and that is your nearest point of complete relief, that would not qualify as the nearest point of complete relief, because a bunker is not the general area, which is where you're required to drop the ball.
You could be taking a considerable distance away from your ball, couldn't you, John? The bunker were close enough to it.
Yeah, it's possible if you have, say a foot between the bunker and the green, yeah.
Interesting.
All right, 13.2, the flag stick. The flag stick, 13.2, the flag stick rule has three parts to it. A is leaving the flag stick in the hole. B is removing the flag stick from the hole. And C is ball resting against the flag stick in the hole. This rule applies to a ball played from anywhere on the course. So this rule applies if your ball's on the fringe or 50 yards out in the fairway, or if the ball is on the putting green. Player may leave flag stick in the hole. If you've watched television the last month, you know that a lot of people are doing this. The key here is the player must decide this before making the stroke. You either have to say before you start, I'm going to take the flag stick, I'm going to leave it in the hole, which you're going to be under 13.2a, or I'm going to remove the flag stick, and then you're going to be under 13.2b. The player must decide this before making the stroke by either leaving the flag stick where it is in the hole, or moving it so that it is centered in the hole and leaving it there. Ken will note that the word center is misspelled. No, it's not misspelled. That's international English for centered. Or having the flag stick removed. In either case, the player must not try to gain an advantage by deliberately moving the flag stick to a position other than centered in the hole. If the player does so and the ball is in motion, then hits the flag stick, he or she gets the general penalty. So notice this is an outcome-based decision. You're only going to get the penalty if you've not centered other than centered it, if the ball hits the flag stick. If you're fortunate enough to tip the flag stick and you miss it, no penalty. Parent 2, no penalty if ball hits flag stick left in the hole. If the player makes a stroke with the flag stick in the hole, left in the hole, and the ball in motion then hits the flag stick, there is no penalty except under 1, which means you've put it someplace other than centered. Parent 3, limitation on player moving or removing flag stick while ball is in motion. So the theory of 13.2a is that you have made the decision to leave the flag stick in the hole, and you have to make that before you play. 13.3 and 13.4 are saying, okay, can you change your mind? We're going to see the answer is no. So parent 3. After making a stroke with the flag stick left in the hole, the player and his or her caddy must not deliberately move or remove the flag stick to affect where the player's ball in motion might come to rest. All right, here's another use of the word deliberate. And again, notice the two parts to it. It's not enough to deliberately move the flag stick. You have to do it for the specific purpose that the rule is prohibiting you from doing it from. And what is that specific purpose? To affect where the player's ball in motion might come to rest. So you can pull the flag stick out deliberately for other reasons. You just can't do it to affect where the player's ball might come to rest. So what's an example of that? You're not paying attention, you're on the green, Gary's 60 feet away. He decides he wants to putt with the flag stick in the hole. And I'm talking to Jim Martin, having a great time. And I deliberately pull the flag stick out of the hole. There's no penalty. Why? Because I haven't deliberately pulled it out to affect where the player's ball in motion came to rest. I pulled it out for another reason, and the other reason was because it's my turn to putt and I'm going to play. And then it says, but there is no penalty if the player has the flag stick in the hole moved or removed for any other reason, such as when he or she reasonably believes the ball in motion will not hit the flag stick. That's a situation of you have a 30-foot uphill putt. The player putts. He's obviously stubbed the putt. You know it's not going even halfway to the hole. If that ball is still rolling, you can pull the flag stick out if you reasonably believe that the ball in motion will not have hit the flag stick. Similarly, if you have a downhill putt and the person putts and the ball is just past the flag stick and it's rolling down the hill, you can pull the flag out while the ball is still in motion if you reasonably believe that the ball in motion will not hit the flag stick. Limitation on other players moving or removing flag stick when player has decided to leave it in the hole. When the player has left the flag stick in the hole and has not authorized anyone else to attend the flag stick, another player must not deliberately move or remove the flag stick to affect where the player's ball might come to rest. Again, this is on the other player, but it's a two-part. It's deliberately take the action to affect where the ball might come to rest. Bullet point 1, if another player or his or her caddy does so before or during the stroke and the player makes the stroke without being aware of this, or does so while the player's ball is in motion after the stroke, the other player gets the penalty. But there is no penalty if the other player's caddy moves or removes the flag stick for any other reason, such as reasonable belief that the player's ball in motion will not hit the flag stick, or is not aware that the player is about to play or the player's ball is in motion. That last point is the one I just made about Gary putting and Jim and I are talking and one of us pulls the flag stick out. Let's see, where am I here? 13.2b, removing flag stick from hole. So again, you have the choice. You have to decide before you make your stroke whether you're going to leave it in the hole, and if you do, you're under 13.2a. If you decide to remove it, you're under 13.2b. The player may make a stroke with the flag stick removed from the hole so that his or her ball in motion will not hit the flag stick. The player must decide this before making the stroke, just as in the previous case, by either having the flag stick removed, authorizing someone to attend the flag stick, which means to remove it by first holding the flag stick in, above, or next to it, and then removing the flag stick after the stroke is made. The player is treated as having authorized the flag stick to be attended if the player's caddy is holding it, the player asks any other person to attend it, or the player sees any other person holding the flag stick in, above, or next to the hole, or standing right next to it, and the player makes the stroke without asking the other person to move away. The comment I'd have on this is, notice the word treated. A player is treated as having authorized the flag stick to be attended. This is the new buzzword, and it's throughout the rules. The old term for the legal fiction was deemed, D-E-E-M-E-D. Under the new rules, that word does not appear anywhere. If you do a word search, you will not find the word deemed. What you will find in its place is the word treated. And again, it's a legal fiction, it doesn't actually happen, but for rules purposes, we're going to treat it as if it did happen. Turn 2. What to do if ball hits flag stick or person attending the flag stick. If the player's ball in motion hits a flagstick that the player had decided to have removed under one, or hits the person who's attending the flagstick, or anything the person is holding, what happens depends on whether this was accidental or deliberate. Here are the 2 points. Ball accidentally hits flagstick or person who removed or is attending it. This is a big change. Under the old rules, if you hit somebody who was hit the flagstick or someone who was attending it, you got a penalty. Now there is no penalty. Play the ball as it lies. So you're putting. You ask John to attend the flagstick, and John realizes he's got to check his cell phone one more time, and he pulls his cell phone out, and he's not paying attention, and I putt, and the ball hits the flagstick, or it hits John. That ball, it's an accidental deflection. You play the ball as it lies. The next bullet point, ball deliberately deflected or stopped by person attending the flagstick. If the person who is attending the flagstick deliberately deflects or stops the player's ball, Rule 11.2c applies. John talked about this. This is what we just went over before the break. Where the ball is played from. The player must not play the ball as it lies and instead must take relief under 11.2. Basically, that means if your ball was played from the putting green and someone deliberately deflects it or stops, it's a do-over. And if it was off the putting green when you put it, you have to go through the estimation of where the ball would have wound up. And again, that's what John went over. For purposes of this rule, deliberately deflected or stopped means the same thing as in Rule 11.2a and includes when the player's ball in motion hits remove flagstick that was deliberately positioned or left in a particular place on the ground so that it might deflect or stop the ball. An example of this, you're on the putting green, you got a downhill putt, you take the flagstick out, you set it a foot behind the hole, and you putt. The ball hits the flagstick. You cannot take the position that you did not deliberately hit the flagstick, because the definition of deliberately means that it includes that you left it in a particular place on the ground so that it might deflect or stop the ball. In addition, you have an affirmative obligation, if you have left something in place, to correct that error even when your ball is in motion so that it doesn't hit the flagstick. So if you have you take the flagstick out, you set it on the ground for no particular purpose, you just set it there, it's 10 feet from the hole, you putt, you all of a sudden realize that you hit your putt extra super duper hard and your ball is going to hit the flagstick. You can't just idly sit by and watch it hit if you're able to move the flagstick with reasonable efforts. If you can't, you're okay, but you cannot deliberately leave it in a place so that the ball is deflected. And the interpretation, again, is 11.2a/1. John mentioned that before. 13.2c. To me, this is one of the most significant changes of anything to do with the putting green. If a player's ball comes to rest against the flagstick left in the hole, if any part of the ball is in the hole below the surface of the putting green, the ball is treated as whole, even if the entire ball is not below the surface. When you think about a ball resting against a flagstick, how many times is it possible that it will be resting against the flagstick with the flagstick in the hole and not at least some part of the ball be below the surface? Hardly ever is going to happen. The only time it's going to happen is if the flagstick is really over to the side of the hole and the previous group didn't center it, and you chip or putt or whatever, and your ball comes up and it just rests against the flagstick. In that case, if none of the ball is below the surface of the putting green, you're going to play the ball as it lies. You can take the the flagstick out and put it in. But in 99% of the cases, if that ball is resting against the flagstick, it is either dropped to the bottom of the hole or at least some part of it is below the hole. And if some part of it is below the hole, the ball is holed. And when you say the ball is holed, that means you're done. You pick it up, you move on, and on you go. Second bullet point. If no part of the ball is if no part of the ball is in the hole below the surface of the putting green, the ball is not holed and must be played as it lies. If the flagstick is removed and the ball moves, whether it falls into the hole or moves away from the hole, there is no penalty, and the ball must be replaced on the lip. A flagstick is a movable obstruction, so we'll see this when we get to 15.2. If you move a movable obstruction and your ball moves, what do? No penalty, you put your ball back. Interesting point is that you put the ball on the lip of the hole. You do not put the ball in the spot that it was in when you moved it. When you think about the lip of the hole, there are 360 degrees worth of lips. I read this to say that you could actually move your ball at least 4 inches, 4¼ inches from where you played it from, because you have to put it on the lip. Yes, you can put it on the other side. John, you agree or disagree?
Oh, that's kind of interesting. I certainly see what you mean.
Okay. I think John's point is he's concerned about the word lip, and he doesn't understand that a lip means there's 360 degrees. Is that the point, John?
I understand
Well,
that
it
part
does
of it.
say-
It's more the ramifications of that that I'm concerned with.
Replace.
The ball must be replaced on the lip. If you look at the definition of replaced, it does not say a ball
Where?
must be put back to the exact spot. It says you must put it where the rule tells you to put it.
Yeah, it says the rule involved identifies a specific spot where the ball must be replaced. And
This
to your
one does.
point, it just says the lip of the hole. It doesn't say on its originals.
Yeah.
Nearest the.
Now, this is
cement.
an intellectual exercise, but it has no practical effect, because what's going to happen is the player is going to put it on the lip, and whether you putt from the 4-inch other side of the lip, your putt's only about, a ½ inch long, and you're not going to miss it. Usually.
You've never seen me.
You want it to be downhill then, because if it was uphill, you could just touch it.
Okay, one caution, anytime John Morissette says, I'm not sure I agree with that, is a cautionary red flag. It is possible that the USGA could issue a clarification that says lip does not mean what I said it means, but means the original spot. But I think until that happens, I would interpret the word on the lip to mean anywhere in the 360 degrees. Okay. 3.3, ball overhanging hole. This is divided into 2 parts, and it's kind of interesting when you think about it. 13.3a talks about the waiting time and what happens if the ball is overhanging the hole and then falls into the hole. And 13.3b says what to do if the ball overhanging the hole is lifted or moved by somebody else during that same waiting time. So let's look at 13.3a. If any part of the player's ball overhangs the lip of the hole, the player is allowed a reasonable time to reach the hole and then 10 more seconds to wait to see whether the ball will fall into the hole. So the first question is, when it talks about waiting time in this rule, how long is the waiting time? And the answer is not 10 seconds. It is a reasonable time to reach the hole plus 10 seconds. Understand that the waiting time could be conceivably 5 or 10 minutes. If you hit your ball from the middle of the fairway, you hit it up on it's overhanging the hole, 3 other people hit in your group, you then walk up, it could take you 10 minutes to get up to the hole. You then get an additional 10 seconds once you get there. The waiting time is that whole period of time. If you have a 2-foot putt and you hit it 23.5 inches and it's on the lip, your waiting time presumably starts immediately because you're already at the hole. So your waiting time is going to be only 10 seconds. But the thing to remember is the term waiting time is two things: the time to get to the hole reasonably and 10 seconds. And there's interpretation talking about what a reasonable time is that sort of goes through that analysis of saying, if you're in the fairway, you're going to get a lot more time than if you're on the putting green. But if you're 10 feet away and your ball overhangs the hole, you can't sit there for a few seconds and think about it. It's a reasonable time to get to the hole plus 10 seconds.
Is that another test trick question?
I don't know. I don't think I've seen that one. Oh, yes, I have. That is on the national test, a number of those, where they have that a player putts from 20 feet away and 12 seconds later, the ball falls into the hole. Well, you don't know whether that's outside the waiting time or not because you don't know if that included the time to get there or not.
But you could putt it and then be like, oh, how did I miss that? And then kind of spin away and kind of go back around.
Martin, you're a lawyer. You've practiced law long enough. You know what the term reasonable means. If you're going with your arms up and around
No,
and
it's not your arms.
dancing,
It's I putt, I miss it, and then I just oh shit, I miss, and then I go back. That's a lot of people do
He
that.
does that a lot.
He does it all the time.
Well, actually,
He misses them all.
I think that's normal. I don't think, I mean, they don't give you a time limit. It's just what you naturally do. Now, if you stand there for 3 minutes staring at it like John Rahm does, then obviously that would be a breach. But what you described, I don't think that's a breach.
But what I'm trying to say is my 10 seconds doesn't start until I
Get over your snip.
get
Right,
back
no,
to get
that's-
back to the hole.
here's what the interpretation says, 13.3a/1. Determining the limits of reasonable time to reach the hole depends on the circumstances of the stroke and includes time for the player's natural or spontaneous reaction to the ball not going into the hole. So Jim Martin's doing his dance. If we constitute that as a spontaneous reaction, seems to me if it's not spontaneous and you're putting on a show for everybody, you don't come under that. So 13.3a/1 says you account for the natural or spontaneous reaction. For example, a player may have played the shot from well off the putting green, and it may take him or her several minutes to reach the hole. Or the player may need to take an indirect route to the hole by walking around the line of play of another person. So that's reasonable.
We can always get them for unreasonable.
Good point, John.
But you might have to take into consideration somebody's physical.
Yes, that's right.
thing
If they're not,
too.
especially on the senior tour, as we all know, those people don't walk and move very fast. But again, we're getting a bit off the track. The question is, what is a reasonable time to reach the hole? Bullet point 2, if the ball falls into the hole in this waiting time, which is not the 10 seconds, it's the 10 seconds plus the reasonable time, the player has holed out with the pre-throw. If the ball does not fall into the hole in this waiting time, the ball is treated as being at rest. If the ball then falls into the hole before it's played, the player has holed out with the previous stroke plus gets 1 penalty stroke. This is the same as it was under the old rules that you get no benefit by waiting more than the waiting time. John, do you have a question?
I thought under the old rules you had to replace the ball.
No, this is saying it falls into the hole.
No.
You then get, that was the old rule. If it falls into the hole after the waiting time is up, you're going to get a penalty stroke of 1 stroke, and then you count that stroke as having fallen in.
Right, but under the old rule, wasn't it you just replaced the?
No.
Okay, it still was the old one.
The rule hasn't changed.
Right. That part of the rule has not changed. What has What has changed is the rule now says the ball is treated as being at rest. What did the old rule said? Deemed. All right. 13.3b, now we're going to look at what happens if the ball that overhangs the hole or is lifted or moved before the waiting time is up. The phrase or the title of this is what to do if ball overhangs hanging hole is lifted or moved before the waiting time has ended. It is likely that this will need to be modified to consider the following. And you're going to need to insert the words other than by natural forces after the term lifted or moved. And I'll explain why. So that phrase 13, the title 13.3b would say what to do if ball overhanging hole is lifted or moved, this is the insert, other than by natural forces before the waiting time has ended. Because what happens if it falls into the hole by natural forces during the waiting time? It's over, the ball's holed. That's the whole point of 13.3a. So what 13.3b is saying, it's now moved by something other than natural forces, such as another person, such as dropping your club, such as any number of things other than gravity pulling the ball into the hole. So if a ball overhanging the hole is lifted or moved other than by natural forces before the waiting time under Rule 13.3a has ended, the ball is treated as having come to rest. The ball must be replaced on the lip and the waiting time is over. So anytime that ball is on the lip and it is moved by anything in the world other than natural forces, the waiting time's over and you put the ball on the lip. So what happens if an opponent walks up looking to see if the ball's there and he drops his putter and the ball moves? Well, we're now going to see what the last bullet points. If the opponent in match play or another player in stroke play deliberately lifts or moves the player's ball overhanging the hole before the waiting time is ended, in match play, the player's ball is treated as hold with the previous stroke and there is no penalty to the opponent. In stroke play, the player who lifted or moved the ball gets the general penalty. So what this is getting at is, in the example that I gave you, if somebody moves that ball other than deliberately, this bottom section of 13.3b does not apply, because the bottom part of 13.3b only applies if the opponent or another player deliberately lifts or moves the ball. So in the example I gave, if the ball is overhanging the hole and a fellow competitor or an opponent or anybody else goes up to the hole and is watching it and accidentally drops their putter, the ball is moved. What do? The waiting time's over, you put it on the lip, and you get any penalty? No. Why? Because 13.1d says a ball on the putting green accidentally moved, no penalty, put it back. If you do it deliberately, then in stroke play, you're going to get 2-stroke penalty, and in match play, there's no penalty, and the ball is holed out with the last one. So what is not covered by this rule is what happens if the player deliberately or accidentally moves the ball. So let's take those two situations. What happens if the player himself goes up to the edge of the hole during the waiting time, accidentally drops his putter? The waiting time's up, you put the ball on the lip, and does he get a penalty? No. Why? Because it's an accidental movement of ball on the putting green. Last example. The player goes up, it's overhanging the hole, the waiting time is not up, and he's really upset. So he cusses and goes down, and he just picks up his ball, and he says, I think that's hold. Is the waiting time up? Yes. Does he have to put the ball back on the lip? Yes. Does he get a penalty? Yes, because that's what John talked about earlier this morning. It's Rule 9.4. The player has lifted his ball. It's on the putting green. He's not authorized to lift it without marking it. He's going to get a 1-stroke penalty. He's got to put the ball back. Carry.
Question.
the ball's on the lip, a fellow competitor within the 10-second time frame goes up and accidentally does something to cause the ball to fall in the hole. Am I deprived of that 10 seconds I had? He
Yes.
just cost me the chance
Yes.
to have that ball fall in.
That's exactly what 13.3b says. The waiting time is up and you put the ball on the lip. And then if it's accidental or deliberate, then you're going to get to the next section. But if someone or something other than natural forces causes a ball that was on the overhanging the hole to be lifted or moved, it's clear. The waiting time is up and you put the ball back.
Now, this says.
So I'm not going to be happy with that guy.
No, you're not. But remember, the person did it accidentally. And if he did it deliberately, he's going to get a 2-stroke penalty. So he certainly has an incentive not to do it deliberately. Yeah, Jim.
That was the question. I thought you said he gets a 1. So I hit my ball, it's hanging on the lip. I'm pissed. I pop it away.
Pop it away by a stroke, or
You
just
caused it
to
to
just
move.
caused it to
Cause
move.
it to move.
Right.
Deliberately, however.
Right.
The waiting period's up. I've got to put it back.
On the lip.
I'm gonna get 2 instead of 1.
Why?
Because that's what this says.
In stroke play, the player who lifted or moved the ball gets the 2-stroke penalty. The ball,
If you deliberately did
It must be replaced. I mean,
but
and if he picked it up, he'd really have 3 penalties, but he'd get the 2.
no, if you look at the just above the 2 bullet points, it says if the opponent in match play or another player in stroke play, da 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 da, and then bullet point number 2 says in stroke play, the player. The player refers to the other player in stroke play. So what is missing from this rule is what to do if it is the player himself who deliberately moves the ball. And I believe the answer is that if you deliberately move the ball, it's a 1-stroke penalty and you got to put it back.
9.4.
John, do you agree?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Always good news when John agrees.
And the last 2 points are enough of disincentivizing to the opponent match player, another
Right.
player, to preclude that person from deliberately moving the ball in that waiting period.
One other thing, if any of you are looking at the official guide and you're on page 186, there is an error in the official guide.
Really.
Look at 186, the official guide, 13.3b. The very last line says, in stroke play, the player who lifted or moved the ball gets the general penalty, 2 strokes. The ball must be placed on the original spot, which if not known, must be estimated. That's the error that is in the official guide. The correct version is in the rules of golf themselves on page 108. You replace the ball on the lip, you don't replace it on the original spot.
And that's what he was playing on. I was looking at page 186.
Very interesting, huh? You gotta be careful of that USGA, they try and slip one past you.
Right here.
Oh,
The ball must be replaced on its original spot. Blah, blah, blah. But it's really the ball must be replaced.
I was gonna say either that or something.
Right.
I got it. Speaking of the lip of the hole, I think that one of the things you have to think about is the purpose in changing these rules. One of the purposes is to speed up play. So if you look at replacing the ball in the lip of the hole, if you're going to have to replace it on the spot, it's going to take more time than if you put it anywhere on the lip, and you're going to get the same result. And I think that's where you have to look at a lot of these things.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think it needs any clarification. I think that's what they meant.
Seems to
Put it
me,
anywhere on the
seems to
lip.
me Ken has made a good point, and now John is contemplating whether he's gonna agree with that or not.
Well, I think Dan's point, I think Dan and Ken are right, that the way you read the rule, that that suggests anywhere on the lip, but, you know, that is an unusual structure for the rules in terms of being imprecise, or rather being so, giving players so much leeway. But, you know, at the end of the day, does it really matter? And as Ken says, no, it does not.
It seems to me you read the rules literally until such time as the USGA tells us not to read them literally. An example we had of hail, to me, is a perfect example. You read them literally. If they hadn't issued a clarification on hail, you would say hail is a natural force. Once they issue that clarification or interpretation, or they change the rule, then we have to follow what the USGA says. Okay, I think we're done unless anybody else has any questions.